You shouldn't be here. We came to talk. After 23 years? I don't believe it.
Here are the documents.
I don't want them. Why are you doing this? Mother, please.
What did Dad leave you in the will?
Oh, I thought this was just to see me. Mom.
You think I don't see this for what it is? After all this time?
Mother, please. Just hear us out. We just want what's right.
For 23 years, my children lived as if I were dead. Then one quiet afternoon in Asheville, a waitress approached my table and whispered, "There are two people asking for Sierra Collins." Nobody had called me that in years. I looked toward the entrance and saw them. My son Nathan Gray at the temples. My daughter Lauren, older now but still wearing the same eyes I saw every morning in the mirror. For years I had imagined this moment. I thought someone would cry. I thought I might hear Mom, we're sorry. Instead, Nathan sat across from me, barely looked at my face and asked, "Do you still own Dad's property?" That was when I understood. They hadn't come back because they missed me. They had come back because suddenly I was worth finding. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me what you would have done in my place. Could you forgive your children after 23 years of silence? And wherever you're listening from tonight, leave your city and the time in the comments. I love knowing where these stories find you. If stories about family betrayal, dignity, and second chances mean something to you, please like and subscribe and stay with me, because my children had no idea who the woman sitting across from them had become. 23 years earlier, before my children learned how easy it was to live without me, I was still Sierra Collins in every ordinary sense of the name. I was 44 years old, married to Robert Collins, and living in a modest two-story house outside Asheville, North Carolina. It wasn't the kind of house anyone photographed for a magazine. The kitchen cabinets were 20 years old, the hardwood floors creaked near the stairs, and every spring Robert promised he was finally going to replace the back porch railing. But it was ours. And for a long time I believed that was enough. Robert worked in construction management. He was practical, careful, and almost painfully conservative with money. I handled bookkeeping for a small construction company 3 days a week, and between the two of us, we built a comfortable life. Not wealthy, comfortable. There is a difference, and my children had already begun noticing it. Nathan was 21 then. He had recently finished school and was determined to build a career in real estate. He talked constantly about Charlotte, expensive neighborhoods, developers, investment properties, and people who seemed to make more money before lunch than Robert and I made in a year. Lauren was 18 and preparing for college. She had always been affectionate as a child. She used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and sleep with one hand wrapped around my wrist. But by 18, something had changed. She had begun comparing. Her friends had newer cars, bigger houses, parents who paid for spring break trips and handed their daughters credit cards without discussing limits. Once, while we were shopping for things she needed for college, Lauren held up a sweater, looked at the price tag, and quietly put it back. "I'll buy it," I told her. She shook her head. "It's fine." I knew that tone. "Lauren," she sighed. "Mom, I said it's fine. What's wrong?" She looked around the store before answering. "Nothing. I just wish everything didn't have to be a discussion." I remember standing there with my purse over my shoulder trying to understand. A discussion, money. Everything is always about whether we can afford it. I felt embarrassed even though I hadn't done anything wrong. "We can afford the sweater. That's not what I mean." She walked away before I could ask what she did mean. Robert understood immediately when I told him that evening. "She's 18, he said. "Everybody else's life looks better at 18. Then he kissed my forehead. "She'll grow out of it." I believed him. Robert had a way of making temporary problems feel temporary. Then, on a Tuesday morning in October, he died. There was no long illness, no warning that allowed us to prepare. He left for work carrying a stainless steel travel mug and complaining that I had put too much cinnamon in his oatmeal. At 10:17 that morning, my supervisor came into the bookkeeping office and closed the door. I knew something was wrong before she spoke. Robert had collapsed at a job site. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. I remember staring at his wedding ring. That is the detail my mind chose to hold on to. Not the doctor explaining what had happened, not the paperwork. Not Nathan standing against the wall with both hands over his face. Not Lauren sobbing so hard a nurse brought her water. Just Robert's ring. $39 when we bought it. He had worn it for 24 years. I kept thinking, how can something still be on his hand when he isn't here anymore? The funeral passed around me like weather. People brought casseroles. Neighbors filled my refrigerator. Robert's coworkers stood in our living room telling stories I had never heard. Nathan tried to be strong. Lauren slept beside me for 3 nights. For those first few days, I believed grief might actually bring us closer. After everyone left following the funeral, the 3 of us sat around the kitchen table. There were unpaid medical bills, funeral expenses, Lauren's tuition, and the ordinary household expenses that did not care that my husband had died. Nathan looked exhausted. "I can stay for a while," he said. I reached across the table. "No. Mom, your father wanted you to start your life." Nathan had been considering moving to Charlotte because a real estate brokerage there had offered him an entry-level position. Robert had been proud of him, so I told Nathan to go. Then I turned to Lauren. "And you are going back to school?" She immediately shook her head. "I can take a semester off." "No, we can't afford." "Yes, we can." I said it more confidently than I felt. The truth was that Robert and I had savings, but not enough to make losing his income irrelevant. Still, I refused to let his death dismantle our children's futures. I paid the funeral expenses. I covered Lauren's tuition gap. When Nathan needed a security deposit for an apartment in Charlotte, I wrote him a check for $1,800. He hesitated before taking it. "You sure your father would want you to have it?" Nathan looked down at the check. Then he said something I didn't understand the importance of until years later. "I just thought Dad would have planned better." I stared at him. "For what?" "For this." He did plan. Nathan looked around the kitchen. "I mean financially." My stomach tightened. "Your father worked hard his entire life. I know. We have savings. I know, Mom." But his expression said something else. Nathan had expected a revelation after his father's death. A hidden investment. A large insurance policy. Something that would transform grief into wealth. Instead, he saw a pound, mortgage, retirement savings, an ordinary life insurance policy, and a mother carefully calculating expenses at the kitchen table. Robert had spent decades providing for us. Nathan looked at the numbers and saw disappointment. I should have challenged him then. Instead, I blamed grief. That became a habit of mine. I explained away everything my children did because the alternative hurt too much. Nathan moved to Charlotte 3 weeks later. I packed food into containers for him. He laughed when he saw how much. "Mom, Charlotte has grocery stores. I've heard rumors." That made him smile. For a moment, he was my boy again. At the door, he hugged me. "I'll call Sunday." I know. He did. The first Sunday. And the second. By Christmas, I was usually the one calling him. Lauren changed more gradually. College opened a world that seemed glamorous compared with Asheville. She joined organizations, made new friends, and started talking about Atlanta. Her roommate's father owned several dental practices. Another friend's parents had a vacation home in Hilton Head. Whenever Lauren came home, she noticed things she had never criticized before. Our countertops, my clothes, my car. One afternoon, she watched me clip grocery coupons at the kitchen table. "You still do that?" I laughed. "Why wouldn't I? It just seems exhausting. Saving $20 is exhausting." She shrugged. "You know what I mean." Actually, I was beginning to. She didn't hate the coupons. She hated what they represented. A mother who thought $20 mattered. A family that had needed to think before spending. A childhood she had started rewriting as deprivation. After graduation, Lauren moved to Atlanta for an entry-level marketing job. I helped with her moving expenses too. The morning she left, I hugged her beside her car. "Call when you get there." "I will. Even if it's late." "Mom, I worry." She smiled, but there was impatience underneath it. "I know." For the first few months, we spoke regularly. Every Wednesday evening, I called Lauren. Every Sunday afternoon, I called Nathan. I organized my week around those conversations without realizing I was doing it. Nathan talked about clients and commissions. Lauren talked about work and people whose names I struggled to remember. I listened. I encouraged. I rarely talked about myself because whenever I did, the conversations seemed to become shorter. If I mentioned being lonely, Nathan would say, "You should get out more." If I told Lauren I missed her, she'd say, "Mom, Atlanta isn't that far." So I learned not to say I was lonely. I learned to sound cheerful. I learned to say, "Everything's good here." Months passed. Then one Sunday, Nathan didn't answer. I left a message. He called Tuesday. "Sorry. Crazy weekend. No problem." The next month it happened again. Then Lauren started responding to my Wednesday calls with texts. "Busy tonight. Call you later." Later rarely came. I began keeping excuses for them the way some women keep recipes. Nathan was building his career. Lauren was young. Traffic in Atlanta was terrible. People worked long hours. Young adults needed independence. They loved me. Of course they loved me. I was their mother. One evening, about 18 months after Robert died, I was sorting documents from his old desk when I found a thick envelope tucked behind several tax folders. Inside were photocopies of property records, correspondence from an attorney, and documents mentioning a parcel outside Asheville. I recognized Robert's handwriting on a yellow note. "Land partnership papers. Keep with estate documents." I vaguely remembered the property. Years earlier, Robert and one of his relatives had become involved in a land arrangement connected to a construction opportunity that never went anywhere. Robert had once described his share as more paperwork than property. I was tired that night. The legal language meant nothing to me, so I placed everything into a small document box with our old insurance papers and tax returns. Then I pushed the box onto the top shelf of the closet. For more than a decade it stayed there. At the time, the thing occupying my mind wasn't land. It was silence. One Sunday, I decided to conduct an experiment. I hated myself for thinking of it that way. I would not call Nathan. Just once. I wanted to see whether he noticed. Sunday afternoon passed, then Sunday evening. Monday came. Nothing. I told myself he would call Tuesday. He didn't. Wednesday was normally Lauren's night. I didn't call her either. Thursday passed. Friday, Saturday. For 7 days, my telephone never rang with either of my children's names. On the 8th morning, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold between my hands. The house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator cycling on and off. I looked at the telephone. All I had to do was pick it up. I could restore everything to normal. I could call Nathan and ask about work. I could call Lauren and pretend I had simply been busy. Instead, I waited, because somewhere inside me a frightening question had begun forming. If I stopped holding our family together, would there still be a family at all? I didn't know the answer yet. But for the first time since Robert died, I was afraid to find out. The answer to that question did not arrive all at once. That would have been easier. If Nathan or Lauren had called me one morning and said, "Mom, we don't want you in our lives anymore," at least I would have had something solid to grieve. Instead, I lost my children by inches. After my little 7-day experiment, I gave in. Of course I did. I called Nathan first. He answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded completely normal. That hurt more than anger would have. "Hi, sweetheart. What's up?" I almost said. "You haven't called me in over a week." Instead, I asked about work. Nathan immediately launched into a story about a difficult client and a house in Myers Park. I listened for 20 minutes. I asked questions. I laughed when he laughed. He never asked why I hadn't called the previous Sunday. He hadn't noticed. Or if he had, it hadn't mattered enough to mention. Lauren was the same. When I called her the following evening, she sounded distracted. "Mom, can I call you back? We're heading out." "Of course. Love you. Love you too." She hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the phone. Those 2 words should have comforted me. Love you. But love is a strange thing when it becomes automatic. Sometimes people say it the same way they say goodbye to a cashier or thank you to someone holding a door. Lauren never called back. Still, I kept trying. For birthdays, I mailed cards. For Christmas, I sent gifts. When Nathan turned 24, I sent him the leather briefcase he'd admired during one of his rare visits home. He texted, "Thanks, Mom. Nice." That was all. For Lauren's 21st birthday, I sent her a small gold necklace that had belonged to my mother. 3 weeks later, I called and asked if the package had arrived. "Oh, yeah. You got the necklace?" "Yeah, sorry. Work has been insane. Did you like it?" A pause. "It's pretty." I waited for her to ask something about her grandmother. She didn't. "I thought you might want something of hers." "Yeah, thanks." Then she changed the subject. I told myself not to be sensitive. That became another habit. Whenever something hurt, I accused myself of expecting too much. Nathan sometimes called when he needed something. Those calls were different. Suddenly he had time. "Mom, quick question. Do you remember how Dad handled estimated taxes?" Or Mom, "I'm looking at a commission structure. Can you check my numbers?" Once he called because he was short on rent after a commission fell through. "How much?" I asked. "Just until next month." "How much?" "Nathan, 2,000. I sent it. He paid back $500 and never mentioned the rest. I never asked. At the time, I thought generosity was how a mother kept a door open. I didn't understand that if you're always the one holding the door, eventually everyone else forgets there is a person standing behind it. Lauren needed money less often, but she needed reassurance. She called after bad dates, after arguments with roommates, after a supervisor criticized her presentation. I would stay awake until midnight listening. Then when things improved, she disappeared again. I became the emergency exit in both my children's lives. Useful when there was smoke. Invisible when the room was comfortable. By the third Christmas after Robert died, I had grown used to disappointment without admitting it. That November, Nathan surprised me. He called on a Tuesday evening. "Mom, what are you doing for Christmas?" I nearly laughed. "What do you think I'm doing? I don't know. I was hoping to see my children." He was quiet. Then he said I might come up. My heart reacted before my mind could protect it. "You will, might. Don't make a huge thing out of it." "I won't." "Seriously, Mom. I don't know yet. I understand. Lauren might be around too." That was enough. For the next month, I behaved like a woman preparing for a royal visit. I cleaned the guest rooms, even though Nathan and Lauren probably wouldn't stay overnight. I washed the good tablecloth. I pulled out Robert's old Christmas decorations. For 3 years, I had avoided using some of them because every ornament seemed to contain a memory. That year, I wanted the house to feel like home again. I bought a small ham because Nathan had always preferred ham to turkey. I made Lauren's favorite sweet potato casserole. I baked the pecan pie Robert used to steal pieces from before dinner. On Christmas morning, I woke before 6. I put on a green sweater Lauren had once said looked good on me. At 11, I texted Nathan, "Merry Christmas. What time are you thinking?" No response. At noon, I texted Lauren, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Are you coming with your brother?" She replied 15 minutes later, "Not sure yet. We'll let you know." That was enough to keep hope alive. At 4, I set the table. 3 plates, 3 wine glasses, 3 cloth napkins. I put a candle in the center and stepped back. For a moment, I could almost see the old version of us. Robert carving meat. Nathan trying to steal a roll. Lauren complaining that her brother had taken the larger serving. I would have given anything for an ordinary argument. At 6, nobody had arrived. I called Nathan. Voicemail. I called Lauren. No answer. At 7, I lowered the oven temperature. At 8, I wrapped the casserole in foil so it wouldn't dry out. At 9, irritation turned into worry. What if they'd been driving together? What if there had been an accident? I checked local traffic reports. Nothing. At 10:30, I called Nathan again. Straight to voicemail. I started pacing. By 11, I was angry enough to tell myself that if they walked through that door, I would finally say something. I would tell them they couldn't do this. I would tell them I deserved a phone call. At 11:37, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for them. I was trying to distract myself. Then I saw a photograph. Nathan had been tagged in it. For several seconds, my brain refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. There he was. My son. standing beneath a chandelier in what looked like an expensive hotel ballroom. He wore a dark suit and held a champagne glass. His arm was around Lauren. My daughter was wearing a red dress I had never seen. Both of them were smiling. The photograph had been posted hours earlier. I clicked it. There were more. Nathan laughing with a group of people. Lauren beside a decorated Christmas tree. The two of them together at a table covered with white linen and gold candles. I looked at the timestamp. 6:14 p.m. At 6:14 I had been checking the ham. At 6:14 my children had already known they weren't coming. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I noticed a comment beneath one of Lauren's photographs. Someone had written, "So glad you and your brother could spend Christmas together. Family is everything." Lauren had replied, "He's pretty much all the family I have these days." I read it twice. Then a third time. Something inside me went completely still. For 3 years I had believed Nathan and Lauren were drifting away because they were busy building separate lives. But they weren't separate. They had each other. They talked. They visited. They celebrated Christmas together. They had simply built a family with one chair deliberately removed. Mine. I closed the laptop. The house suddenly felt enormous. I walked into the dining room. 3 plates waited beneath the chandelier. I picked up Nathan's plate first, then Lauren's. I carried them into the kitchen and placed them beside the sink. When I came back for mine, I couldn't move. I sat down. The candle in the center of the table had burned almost to the bottom. For the first time that night, I cried. Not loudly. There was nobody to hear me anyway. I cried because I missed Robert. I cried because I had spent all day cooking food nobody intended to eat. But mostly I cried because I finally understood something I had been refusing to see. My children had not forgotten me. Forgetting is accidental. This was different. They had remembered Christmas. They had remembered each other. They had simply chosen not to remember me. The next morning, Nathan called. "Merry Christmas, Mom." I looked at the clock. December 26th. Christmas was yesterday. I know, sorry. Things got crazy. I said nothing. He filled the silence. A friend had this party in Charlotte and Lauren happened to be here. Happened to be here. I closed my eyes. "You two had fun." Another pause. "Yeah. It was last minute. Was it? What does that mean?" "Nothing. I wasn't ready. Not yet." Part of me still believed that confronting the truth might destroy whatever little connection remained. So I protected the connection instead of protecting myself. "I made your favorite ham," I said. "Mom. I told you not to make a big deal. I know. We'll do something soon. Soon." That word would keep me waiting for years. Lauren texted later that afternoon. "Sorry about yesterday. Hope you had a good Christmas." I typed several responses. I deleted all of them. Finally, I wrote, "I love you." She responded with a heart. That tiny symbol sat on my screen like an insult, though I knew she probably hadn't meant it that way. I still sent birthday cards the following year. I still bought Christmas gifts. I still called. Because mothers can recognize a locked door and continue knocking long after everyone else would have walked away. But something had changed inside me. I began noticing patterns I had once refused to see. Nathan knew things about Lauren she had never told me. Lauren mentioned Nathan's new clients and vacations. They knew who the other was dating. They knew each other's plans. I was always learning about their lives secondhand. One afternoon I called Lauren and mentioned Nathan was considering buying a condo. "I know," she said casually. "I told him the one he likes is overpriced." I gripped the phone tighter. "When did you talk to him this morning?" "This morning." "Yeah." I had left Nathan a voicemail 3 days earlier. He hadn't returned it. That night I went to the hall closet and took down a box containing old photographs. There was Nathan at 7 with his front teeth missing. Lauren asleep against my shoulder at Disney World. The 3 of us beside Robert at a Blue Ridge Parkway overlook. I studied those photographs as if they belonged to another family. I kept asking myself the same question. What had I done? There had to be something. Children didn't simply erase their mother. At least that was what I believed then. I didn't yet know that Nathan was going to answer that question in the cruelest possible way. 3 years later, I would stand outside his townhouse in Charlotte, holding his father's wedding gift. And I would discover that to the people in Nathan's new life, Sierra Collins wasn't estranged. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't distant. I was dead. 3 years after that Christmas, I learned there are worse things than being forgotten. You can be erased. By then, Nathan was 27 and doing well in Charlotte real estate. I knew that mostly through other people. Occasionally, someone from Asheville would mention seeing his name online or hearing about a property he'd sold. Once an old friend of Robert's mailed me a newspaper clipping with Nathan's photograph beside a short article about young real estate professionals. I put it on my refrigerator. Nathan never knew. Our conversations had become increasingly shallow. How are you busy? How's work good? Are you seeing anyone, Mom? That final word usually ended the subject. Lauren was living in Atlanta, moving steadily upward in marketing. She and Nathan remained close. I knew because they occasionally revealed information about each other by accident. I was still sending cards, still making calls, still finding ways to explain their silence. Then one afternoon, I ran into a woman named Carol Jennings at the grocery store. Carol's husband had worked with Robert years earlier. After the usual questions about how I was doing, she smiled. "You must be excited about Nathan." My stomach tightened. "What about Nathan?" Her smile disappeared. "Oh." I knew that expression. It was the face people make when they realize they've told you something you were supposed to know already. "Carol. He's engaged." For a moment I thought I'd misunderstood her. "Engaged." She touched my arm. "I assumed you knew." I forced a smile. "Of course. I just didn't know word had gotten around. It was a lie, and I think Carol knew it." She quickly changed the subject. I finished shopping with almost nothing I had come to buy. Nathan was engaged. My son had asked a woman to spend the rest of her life with him, and I had learned beside the canned vegetables in a grocery store. That evening I called him. Voicemail. I tried again the next day. Nothing. On the third day he finally called back. "Hey Mom, everything okay?" I sat at the kitchen table. "I heard congratulations are in order." Silence. "Then who told you?" "Not I'm sorry. Not I was going to tell you. Who told you?" "Does it matter? No. Things have been crazy." "What's her name, Vanessa?" "How long have you been together?" "About a year." "A year." I pressed my thumb against the edge of the table. "Are you happy?" "Yes." That answer came quickly. Despite everything, I smiled. "Then I'm happy for you." "Thanks. Will I get to meet her?" Another silence. "We'll figure something out." That sentence told me more than I wanted to know. After we hung up, I went upstairs and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were a few things that had belonged to Robert. His college yearbook, several letters he'd written me, a pocket knife, and a watch. It wasn't especially expensive, but Robert had treasured it. Stainless steel, simple-face leather band replaced twice over the years. A few months before he died, Robert had been polishing it at the kitchen table when Nathan came home. "Still wearing that dinosaur?" Nathan joked. Robert laughed. "One day it'll be yours." Nathan picked it up. When you're responsible enough not to lose it." Nathan grinned. "So never." Robert looked at me. Wedding day. That memory had stayed with me. So I took the watch from the cedar chest. I had it cleaned and placed in a small wooden box. Then I waited for Nathan to invite me. Weeks passed. Nothing. I sent a card congratulating him and Vanessa. No response. Eventually I decided I wasn't going to let fear keep me from doing what Robert would have wanted. I found Nathan's address in Charlotte. The drive took a little over 2 hours. The entire way I rehearsed reasonable explanations. Maybe Nathan had been overwhelmed. Maybe Vanessa had a complicated family. Maybe they hadn't planned the wedding yet. Maybe my showing up would break through whatever awkwardness had grown between us. His townhouse was beautiful. Brick exterior, black shutters, trim landscaping. A silver sedan sat in the driveway beside Nathan's car. I parked on the street. For several minutes I sat with the wooden box in my lap. Then I told myself something I had told myself 1,000 times. He's your son. I walked to the door and knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Nathan looked at me, and his face lost all color. "Mom, I smiled nervously. Surprise. He immediately stepped outside. Then he pulled the door almost closed behind him. Not completely. Almost. My smile disappeared. What are you doing here? I wanted to see you. You should have called. I did. Several times. I've been busy. I know. He looked toward the window. What's that? I held up the wooden box. Something your father wanted you to have. His expression softened for half a second. Then a woman's voice came from inside. Nathan turned. I'll be right there. I looked at him. Is that Vanessa? He rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, this really isn't a good time. I drove 2 hours. I know, but her parents are here. For one ridiculous second I felt hopeful. Then I'd love to meet them. No. The word came too quickly. We both heard it. I stared at him. No, I mean today is complicated. Nathan, I'm not asking to move in. I drove here to give you something. The door opened wider. A young woman appeared. She was elegant with dark hair pulled back and a cream-colored sweater. She smiled politely. There you are. Then she noticed me. Oh, hi. Nathan looked trapped. I waited. This was the moment. All he had to say was, Vanessa, this is my mother. Instead, he said, Vanessa, this is Sierra. Sierra. Not Mom. Not my mother. Just Sierra. Vanessa extended her hand. Nice to meet you. I shook it. You too. She glanced at Nathan. How do you two know each other? I watched my son's face. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then an older couple appeared behind Vanessa. Her parents. The woman smiled warmly. Are we interrupting? Nathan spoke quickly. No. Sierra was just dropping something off. Something inside me went cold. Vanessa looked at the box. Oh, are you from the office? I could have ended it right there. I could have said no, sweetheart. I gave birth to him. But I didn't. I looked at Nathan. I wanted him to do it. I needed him to. Actually, I said quietly, Nathan and I go back a very long way. Nathan's eyes warned me. Vanessa laughed. Well, anyone who knew him before Charlotte probably has stories. I have a few. Nathan stepped toward me. Mom? He stopped. But it was too late. Vanessa heard him. Her smile vanished. What did you say? Nobody moved. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Vanessa looked from him to me. Did you call her Mom? I could hear my heartbeat. Nathan finally said, Vanessa, can we talk inside? No. Who is she? I answered, because I could no longer bear watching him search for another lie. I'm his mother. Vanessa stared at me, then at Nathan. Her father frowned. Her mother whispered. What Vanessa's face changed completely. Nathan told me his parents were dead. There are sentences that do not hurt immediately. They are too large. Your mind has to circle them before it understands where the wound is. I looked at Nathan. Both. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa stepped backward. You said your mother died when you were in college. Nathan's father actually had died when he was in college. He had simply buried me beside him. Nathan. My voice barely worked. Why, Mom, please? No, I want to hear it. Vanessa's parents quietly moved back inside, but Vanessa stayed. Nathan lowered his voice. It wasn't supposed to become this. What wasn't the story? The story. He looked embarrassed now, not ashamed, embarrassed. There were questions when Vanessa and I started dating. What questions about my family? And he exhaled sharply. Her family knows a lot of people. Her father works with developers. They have a certain circle. I stared at him. What does that have to do with me being dead? Nathan looked toward the street. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He hesitated. Then he said it. I didn't want to explain where I came from. For a second I saw him as a little boy again. 7 years old. Grass stains on his knees. Running into the kitchen because he'd fallen from his bicycle. Mom. That boy had once reached for me when the world hurt. Now I was apparently the part of the world he was ashamed of. Where you came from. That's not what I meant. We had a home, I know. You went to good schools, I know. Your father worked 6 days a week. I know, Mom. We helped you start your career. I said I know. Then what exactly were you ashamed of? Ashamed of. His jaw tightened. It was easier. I stopped breathing. What? He looked at me then. It was easier to say you were both gone. Easier. The same son I had stayed awake with through fevers. The same son whose first apartment deposit I had paid. The same son whose father had been buried while I held him in my arms. It had been easier to bury me too. I looked down at the box. Suddenly I wanted to throw it into the street. Instead I held it out. Nathan frowned. What is it? Open it. He did. When he saw the watch, his face changed. Dad's. He wanted you to have it when you got married. Nathan touched the worn leather band. For one brief moment, grief appeared in his face. Real grief. I almost reached for him. Almost. Then I remembered Vanessa standing behind him, learning that the dead woman had driven 2 hours to deliver a wedding gift. I stepped backward. Mom. I looked at him. I hope becoming someone else was worth what you had to erase. I didn't. Yes, Nathan. You did. I turned toward my car. He followed me halfway down the walkway. Can we talk about this later? I stopped. Later. Soon. Someday. The vocabulary of people who want forgiveness without facing what they have done. I looked back at him. You've had 6 years to talk to me. Then I got into my car. I didn't cry immediately. I drove out of Charlotte. I merged onto the highway. I passed exits without seeing them. About 40 minutes outside the city, I pulled into a gas station because my hands were shaking too badly to hold the steering wheel. I parked beside a row of trees. Then I cried. Not because Nathan had lied about me. Not entirely. I cried because I finally understood that his distance wasn't an accident. He had redesigned his life, and I didn't fit the picture. When I eventually reached Asheville, it was dark. I walked into my quiet house and turned on the hallway light. Robert's photograph sat on the table. I picked it up. Your son told people I was dead. Saying it aloud made it real. I sat there for a long time. Then the phone rang. Nathan. I watched his name flash across the screen. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. A minute later, a message appeared. Mom. I'm sorry you found out like that. I'll explain. I read it carefully. Not, I'm sorry I said you were dead. I'm sorry you found out. Even then, Nathan was sorry about the exposure, not the wound. I turned the phone face down. But despite everything, I still wasn't ready to let my children go. I wish I could tell you that Charlotte was the moment I finally chose myself. It wasn't. A mother's hope can survive humiliations that should have killed it. 2 years later, when I learned Lauren was pregnant, that hope came roaring back. I thought a baby might change everything. I thought becoming a mother herself might make my daughter remember hers. So I bought soft yellow yarn. I began knitting a blanket for a granddaughter I had never met. And when Lauren went into labor in Atlanta, I drove there carrying that blanket beside me. I had no idea I was about to discover that Nathan wasn't the only child who had learned how to erase me. When I learned Lauren was pregnant, I made the mistake of believing motherhood would bring my daughter back to me. I didn't hear the news from Lauren. By then I had learned not to expect important family announcements directly from my children. A Christmas card arrived from Carol Jennings, the same woman who had accidentally told me about Nathan's engagement years earlier. At the bottom, beneath a handwritten note about her husband's retirement, Carol added one innocent sentence. I heard Lauren is expecting. You must be thrilled to become a grandmother. I read it twice. Then I sat down at the kitchen table. My daughter was having a baby. For the first time in months, something warmer than disappointment moved through me. I pictured Lauren as an infant. She had been born with a full head of dark hair and a furious little cry. Robert had laughed because she seemed offended by the entire experience of being born. She already has opinions, he whispered. He had been right. I remembered holding her at 3 in the morning, walking circles through our living room because she refused to sleep anywhere except against my chest. I remembered her first fever, her first day of kindergarten, the thunderstorms when she climbed into our bed. Surely I thought becoming a mother would make her understand. Not excuse everything, just understand. I called her that evening. Voicemail. Hi, sweetheart. I heard some wonderful news. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. Call me when you can. I kept the message light. No accusation about learning from someone else. No guilt. No tears. 3 days passed. Then 5. After a week, I wrote a letter. Dear Lauren, I don't want to intrude on your life. I only want you to know how happy I am for you. Becoming a mother was one of the greatest gifts of my life, even when it was frightening and exhausting. If you ever need anything, I'm here. I love you. Mom. I mailed it. No response. Still, I began knitting. My mother had taught me when I was 12. I hadn't knitted seriously in years, but my hands remembered. I chose soft yellow yarn because I didn't know whether the baby was a boy or a girl. Every evening, I worked on the blanket while watching television. Stitch by stitch, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Maybe Lauren would call after the baby was born. Maybe she'd be tired and scared. Maybe she'd finally say, Mom, I need you. And I would go. No questions, no punishment, no lecture about the years she'd ignored me. I would simply go. That is the humiliating thing about loving your children. Even after they teach you not to expect them, part of you remains packed and ready whenever they might need you. Months passed. I heard occasional updates through acquaintances. Lauren was doing well. The baby was a girl. Her due date was in early September. I learned my granddaughter's name before I learned her face. Emily. Emily Collins. I whispered it aloud in my kitchen. Emily. I finished the blanket 2 weeks before Lauren's due date. In one corner, I embroidered a tiny E. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a white gift box. I added a card. Welcome to the world, sweet girl. You are loved more than you know. Love, Grandma Sierra. I stared at the word grandma for a long time. I had waited years to write it. Then, on a Wednesday morning, Carol called. I almost didn't answer. Sierra. Yes, I hope I'm not overstepping. My heart immediately began pounding. What happened? Nothing bad. Lauren's at the hospital. I stood. The baby. I think so. My niece knows someone who works with Lauren. She mentioned it this morning. Which hospital? Carol hesitated. Sierra. Please. She told me. Atlanta. A little over 3 hours away. I hung up and stared at the gift box. This was the moment when a wiser woman might have waited. She might have respected the silence. She might have understood that Lauren's failure to tell me was itself an answer. But I wasn't that woman yet. I was a mother who had spent years standing outside locked doors convincing herself the next one might open. I packed an overnight bag. I put the blanket on the passenger seat. Then I drove south. During those hours, I rehearsed what I would say. Nothing dramatic. I wouldn't demand to see Lauren. I wouldn't embarrass her. I would leave the blanket with a nurse if necessary. I just needed her to know I had come. As Atlanta appeared around me, my hope became almost unbearable. I imagined holding Emily. I imagined Lauren watching me and suddenly remembering something. Not the arguments, not the years of distance, just the feeling of being somebody's daughter. The hospital parking garage was crowded. I found a space on the 4th level. Then I sat there. 10 minutes. 20. 30. The gift box rested beside me. My courage disappeared. What if Lauren became angry? What if her husband asked me to leave? What if I ruined the day? Eventually, I decided to call the hospital first. A receptionist transferred me to maternity. I'm trying to reach my daughter, I said. What's the patient's name? I gave it. There was a pause. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't provide information about that patient. I understand. I'm her mother. Another pause. I still can't provide any information. Could you tell her Sierra Collins is here? I can make a note. Please. I waited in the car. An hour passed. No call. I walked downstairs and bought coffee I never drank. Another hour. Still nothing. I called again. A different person answered. I repeated my request. This time the woman's voice softened. Ma'am, I'm afraid I really can't help. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. Has my daughter asked that I not be given information? Silence. I can't discuss a patient's privacy preferences. That was an answer. I thanked her. Then I returned to my car. I could have gone upstairs. I knew that. I could have stood at the maternity desk and demanded someone acknowledge that I was Lauren's mother. I could have created a scene. For a few minutes, anger tempted me. After all, hadn't I earned the right to meet my granddaughter? Hadn't I raised Lauren, paid for college, sat beside her bed through every childhood illness? Didn't any of that count? Then another thought stopped me. Emily's first day in the world did not belong to my pain. I would not turn her birth into a battlefield. So I stayed in the car. Late afternoon became evening. The garage lights came on. I watched families come and go. A man walked past carrying pink balloons. A grandmother followed him with flowers. She was laughing. I looked at the blanket beside me. I pressed my hand against the box. And for the first time I allowed myself to say something I had spent years avoiding. My daughter did not want me there. Not because she was busy. Not because Atlanta was far away. Not because life had gotten complicated. She did not want me there. The distinction mattered. My phone rang just after 7. For one wild second I thought it was Lauren. It was Carol. Any news? No. Are you still there? Yes. She was quiet. Sierra, come home. I closed my eyes. What if she calls? Then you can turn around. She just had a baby. I know, she might need me. Carol's voice became gentle. And if she does, she knows how to find you. I started crying. Not dramatically, just tears slipping down my face while I stared through the windshield. She knows, I whispered. Yes. That was the part I had refused to accept. Lauren knew my telephone number. She knew my address. Nathan knew them too. My children were not lost. I was not searching for people who couldn't find their way home. They knew exactly where home was. They simply weren't coming. I drove back to Asheville that night. The blanket stayed on the passenger seat the entire way. I stopped once at a rest area and considered throwing it into a trash can. I couldn't. When I finally reached home, it was after midnight. I carried the gift box upstairs. At the back of my closet was a shelf where I kept family photographs and old papers. I placed the blanket there. Then I saw the birthday calendar hanging beside my dresser. It was something I'd kept since Nathan and Lauren were children. Birthdays, anniversaries, school milestones long since irrelevant. I took it down. For a moment I thought about tearing it in half. Instead, I opened the drawer beneath my nightstand and placed it inside. That gesture was so small, nobody else would have understood it. But to me, it was enormous. For years, my life had been organized around remembering people who had chosen to forget me. Their birthdays, their Christmases, their problems, their achievements, their lives. I had kept myself permanently available in case either child decided I was useful again. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and said aloud, "No more." My voice shook. I tried again. "I will not beg my children to acknowledge me." The house was silent. "I will not chase people who know where to find me." I cried after saying it. Because setting a boundary does not mean you stop loving someone. Sometimes it means admitting love has become the weapon you keep using against yourself. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and expected regret. Instead, I felt tired, deeply tired. I made coffee. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't call the hospital. I didn't call Nathan to ask whether he knew his sister had given birth. For the first time in years, I did nothing. 3 days later, I received a text from Lauren. "Baby Emily arrived Wednesday. We're both doing well." There was a photograph attached. My granddaughter had dark hair and tiny fists tucked beneath her chin. I stared at her face until I memorized it. Then I typed, "She's beautiful. I'm glad you're both safe. I love you." I nearly added, "Can I come see her?" I deleted the question. Lauren responded, "Thanks." That was all. I saved Emily's photograph. Then I put my phone down. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of my disappearance. Not from the world. From the role I had been playing in my children's lives. The woman who waited. The woman who called. The woman who apologized for wanting to belong. The woman who accepted scraps because she was afraid of having nothing. A few months later, I would begin clearing out Robert's things and preparing to sell the house. and buried among old tax records, construction papers, and memories. I hadn't touched in years. I would find the box containing documents about that forgotten piece of land outside Asheville. At the time, I thought those papers were just another remnant of Robert's unfinished business. I had no idea they would eventually become the reason my children remembered I was alive. The day I stopped chasing my children, nothing dramatic happened. No thunderstorm rolled over Asheville. No music played. Nobody appeared at my door to tell me I had finally made the right decision. I simply woke up the next morning and did not call anyone. For years, silence had frightened me because I believed it meant I was losing Nathan and Lauren. Now I began to understand something different. They were already gone. The silence was simply the place they had left behind. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Every Sunday afternoon, my hand still reached automatically toward the phone. Sunday had been Nathan's day for so long that my body remembered the routine even after my heart had given up on it. On Wednesdays, I still thought about Lauren. Is she working late? Is Emily sleeping through the night? Does she need help? I had 100 questions and no place to put them. So I started putting them somewhere else. Into myself. I went for walks. I cleaned rooms that had been untouched for years. I took myself to lunch without pretending I was waiting for someone. And I stopped sending money. That part revealed more than I expected. Nathan had not called me socially in months, but 6 weeks after I stopped reaching out, my phone rang on a Thursday evening. "Hey, Mom," I knew immediately. His voice was too warm. "Hello, Nathan. How are things? Fine. Good. Good." A pause. Then he began explaining that a real estate commission had been delayed. He was temporarily short because of some expenses. I listened. Finally, he said, "I just need maybe 3,000 until the deal closes." There had been a time when I would have opened my checkbook before he finished the sentence. Instead, I asked, "What happened to your emergency savings?" He laughed awkwardly. "It's complicated. You're a real estate professional. What does that have to do with anything? You understand money." "Mom," I said, "it's temporary. I know. So can you help?" I looked around my kitchen. The refrigerator needed replacing. The gutters needed repairs. My retirement account was not unlimited. For years, I had treated my own financial security as less important than whatever problem my children presented. "No," I said. The word frightened me. Nathan went silent. "What, I can't send you $3,000. You can't, I won't." That silence was different. "You've never had a problem helping before." "I know. Is this because of Lauren?" "No." "Because of what happened with Vanessa?" "No." "Then what?" I took a breath. "Because you're 29 years old, Nathan." He laughed without humor. "Wow. What, nothing? No, say it." "I just didn't realize there were conditions." "There weren't. Sounds like there are now. There are boundaries now." He was quiet. Then he said, "Fine. Forget I asked." He hung up without saying goodbye. I cried afterward, not because I regretted saying no, because I realized how unfamiliar the words sounded between us. A month later, Lauren's birthday arrived. I bought a card out of habit. I stood in the greeting card aisle holding it for nearly 5 minutes. Then I put it back. That evening, I sent a simple text. "Happy birthday, Lauren. I hope you have a beautiful day. Love, Mom." She responded 3 hours later. "Thanks." I stared at that word. For once, I did not turn it into something more. I didn't tell myself she was busy. I didn't imagine affection hidden behind 4 letters. I accepted exactly what she had given me. Then I put the phone away. The hardest decision came several months later. The house. Robert and I had bought it when Nathan was 5 and Lauren was 2. For decades, I had thought of it as the Collins family home. Nathan's height marks were still penciled inside a pantry doorway. Lauren had once drawn a flower in blue crayon beneath the upstairs windowsill. Robert had pretended to be furious, but neither of us ever painted over it. Every room contained us. That had once been comforting. Now it felt like living inside a museum dedicated to people who no longer visited. I was cleaning the upstairs hallway one afternoon when I stopped beside the guest room. Nathan hadn't slept there in nearly 8 years. Lauren hadn't slept in hers even longer. Yet I had kept both rooms almost unchanged. Fresh sheets, old photographs, closets with forgotten belongings. Ready, always ready. I stood there and asked myself a question Diane would later ask me in a different form. Who was I keeping this house for? The answer hurt. People who weren't coming home. Within a month, I contacted a real estate agent. When she suggested a listing price, I nearly dropped my coffee. Asheville property values had risen considerably. "You've got good equity here," she said. "I suppose I do. You could downsize and still have a very comfortable cushion." Downsize. The word should have sounded like losing something. Instead, it sounded like permission. I signed the listing agreement. Then I began sorting 20 years of accumulated life. I donated furniture, sold tools Robert had once used, packed photographs. Every box forced me to decide whether an object belonged to my future or only to my past. One Saturday, I climbed into the small storage area beside Robert's old office closet. Dust covered everything. There were tax returns, insurance files, old construction estimates, and binders from projects Robert had worked on decades earlier. Near the back was a document box. I recognized it immediately. The land papers. I had found them once after Robert died and forgotten them almost as quickly. I carried the box downstairs. At the kitchen table, I spread everything out. There was a deed reference, several partnership agreements, letters from an attorney, a rough survey map showing acreage outside Asheville, and Robert's yellow handwritten note, land partnership papers, keep with estate documents. I remembered asking him about the property years before his death. One of his cousins and several business associates had become involved in purchasing undeveloped land. They had imagined some kind of commercial project. Nothing happened. Robert once joked that his share was worth about 3 pine trees and a headache. I smiled, remembering it. Then I found a document containing language I didn't understand. Trust, beneficiary, interest transferred. I read it twice. Legal language has a remarkable ability to make intelligent people feel illiterate. I put the papers back in order. For a moment, I considered throwing them away with other outdated documents. Robert's handwritten note stopped me. Keep with estate documents. All right, Robert, I murmured. I kept them. I had no idea those papers would one day be worth millions. At that moment, they were simply one more thing my husband had asked me not to lose. The house sold faster than expected. When closing day came, I walked through every room alone. I touched the pantry doorway where Nathan's height marks remained. I ran my fingers over Lauren's faded blue flower. Then I stood in the kitchen. For years I had imagined my children returning through that door. Maybe with spouses, maybe with grandchildren, maybe apologizing. I had kept the house partly because it was the last address where we had still been a family. Selling it felt like admitting that family was not coming back. But it also felt like something else. Freedom. I did my best, I whispered. I wasn't sure whether I was speaking to Robert the house or myself. Then I locked the door. My new home was a cottage on the quieter side of Asheville. 2 bedrooms, a small porch, enough garden for tomatoes and herbs. The first night I sat among unpacked boxes eating Chinese takeout. Nobody knew where the serving bowls were. The curtains weren't hung. I couldn't find the corkscrew. And I felt strangely happy. Everything in that cottage existed because I had chosen it. Not because Robert liked it. Not because Nathan needed it. Not because Lauren preferred it. Me. That realization was so unfamiliar it almost embarrassed me. A few weeks later, I saw a flyer at the local community center. Beginner pottery, Tuesday evenings. Normally I would have walked past. I had never considered myself artistic. But my evenings were empty now, so I registered. That decision changed my life more than I could possibly have known. On the first Tuesday, I arrived early and sat near the end of a long work table. A woman about my age dropped into the chair beside me. She had short silver-streaked hair, large glasses, and the confidence of someone who had never apologized for occupying space. She looked at my untouched block of clay. "First time, is it that obvious?" She laughed. "Mine too. I'm Diane. Sierra. Nice to meet you, Sierra." No last name, no explanation, no history, just Sierra. We spent the next hour producing 2 objects that were allegedly bowls. Diane looked at mine. That could hold something. What disappointment. I laughed so hard I nearly ruined it completely. After class, we got coffee. Then again, the following week. Diane was divorced, had grown children living in different states, and possessed an almost aggressive curiosity about people. She asked questions I wasn't accustomed to answering. What books did I like? Where did I want to travel? What did I do for fun? Most of my answers were embarrassingly vague. One evening, sitting outside a coffee shop, Diane asked, "So what do you want?" I assumed she meant coffee. "I'm fine." "No. In your life." I stared at her. "What do you mean you've told me what your husband wanted? You've told me what your kids needed. You've told me what your old boss expected." She leaned forward. "What does Sierra want?" My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I was 53 years old, and I could not answer the simplest question anyone had ever asked me. Diane didn't rescue me from the silence. She just waited. Finally, I laughed nervously. "I don't know." "Good. Good. Now you get to find out." That night, I returned to my cottage and stood in the living room. For years, I had believed my children's absence had reduced my life. Maybe it had. But looking around that little house, I began wondering whether the empty spaces could be filled with something other than waiting. I didn't know yet that Diane would become the closest thing I had to a sister. I didn't know we would eventually build a business together. I didn't know I would reclaim my maiden name. And I certainly didn't know that the forgotten document box sitting on the top shelf of my new closet contained the very thing that would eventually lead Nathan and Lauren back to me. All I knew was that someone had finally asked what Sierra wanted. And for the first time in my life, I intended to find out. Finding out what I wanted turned out to be much harder than sacrificing what I wanted. Sacrifice had rules. When Nathan needed something, I helped. When Lauren was struggling, I listened. When Robert worked late, I kept dinner warm. When bills arrived, I paid them. For most of my adult life, I had known exactly how to be useful. But usefulness and identity are not the same thing. Diane understood that before I did. A few months after we met, we were sitting in my cottage drinking coffee when she noticed a stack of papers on my dining table. "What's all that?" "Your friend Melissa's financial disaster." Diane laughed. Melissa owned a small gift shop downtown. A week earlier, Diane had mentioned that she was overwhelmed by receipts, invoices, payroll records, and tax documents. I had offered to help. What I expected to take one afternoon became 3. Not because the work was difficult, because Melissa had apparently been using a shoebox as an accounting system. Diane picked up one of the folders. "You did all this, I organized it. You color-coded it. I like knowing where things are." I built her a spreadsheet. She needed one. Diane stared at me. "What, you know people charge money for this?" I laughed. "I used to do bookkeeping." "Exactly. That was years ago. Can you still do it?" "Of course." "Then why are you doing it for free?" The question annoyed me. "She's your friend." So I was helping." Diane leaned back. "Sierra, you have a dangerous relationship with the word helping." I knew what she meant. I pretended not to. A few days later, Melissa called. For 10 minutes, she told me how much easier everything had become. Then she asked if I would help her every month. "I can pay you," she added quickly. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." "Melissa." "Noma, Diane already warned me you'd say that." I smiled despite myself. "What did she tell you, that if I let you work for free, she'd personally ruin my filing system again?" That was how I got my first client. One client became 2 when Melissa referred me to the owner of a bakery. The bakery owner introduced me to a woman who ran a small interior design business. Within 6 months, I had 8 regular clients. I bought a better computer. I converted my second bedroom into an office. And something unexpected happened. I became good at being needed without being consumed. My clients did not expect me to solve their lives. They respected my time. They paid invoices. They said thank you. If I told them I was unavailable on Saturday, they waited until Monday. That shouldn't have felt revolutionary. It did. One afternoon, Diane walked into my office carrying a bottle of sparkling cider. "What are we celebrating, you?" "That sounds dangerous. You made more this month than you did at your old part-time bookkeeping job. I looked at the numbers. She was right. For years I had thought my professional life was mostly behind me. I had been wrong. Diane sat across from my desk. You need a business name. I have a business. You have clients' income expenses and a printer that sounds like it's dying. That's a business. I laughed. What would I call it? She shrugged. Something with your name? I looked at the notepad in front of me. Sierra Collins. The name suddenly felt strange. Not wrong. Heavy. Collins was Robert. Collins was Nathan. Collins was Lauren. I had worn that name for almost 30 years, and I had loved the family attached to it. But that family no longer existed in the way I had understood it. Before Robert, I had been Sierra Hart. I hadn't written that name in decades. Slowly I picked up my pen. Sierra Hart. Diane glanced at it. Hart, my maiden name. I like it. I looked at the words again. So did I. At first I used Hart only professionally. Sierra Hart Bookkeeping Services. It wasn't a disguise. Anyone could have found my legal name. I wasn't hiding from debt police creditors or my children. I simply wanted one part of my life that did not begin with the Collins family. Clients began calling me Ms. Hart, then Sierra Hart. Each time I heard it, something inside me straightened. It felt like meeting a younger version of myself I had abandoned somewhere along the road. The woman before marriage, before motherhood, before every decision required considering 3 other people first. About a year later, Diane suggested we work together. She had experience in office administration and client management. I had bookkeeping expertise. More importantly, we worked well together. We rented 2 rooms above a small insurance office. The carpet was ugly. The air conditioner rattled. Our first sign was slightly crooked. I loved every inch of it. We expanded beyond basic bookkeeping. Many clients were small family businesses, where financial records had become tangled with personal relationships. We helped organize payroll, invoices, tax documents, budgets, household financial systems. Soon I noticed a pattern. Women started coming to me alone. Women in their 50s, 60s, sometimes 70s. A husband had died and they didn't know where accounts were. A divorce had left them handling finances for the first time. An adult child had helped so much that the mother no longer understood what she owned. I recognized the fear in their faces. Not because I had experienced every situation, because I knew what it felt like to believe someone else's needs mattered more than your security. I would sit across from them and say, "We start with what you know." Then we built from there. The business grew, not explosively, steadily. That suited me. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anything. I was building. 3 years after I first wrote Sierra Hart on that notepad, I legally changed my surname. The decision surprised even Diane. Are you sure? Yes. You don't have to erase Robert. I'm not. And your children? I looked at her. They already made their choice about the name Collins. Diane didn't answer. I continued. Robert was the love of my life. Changing my name doesn't change that. But I was Sierra Hart before I became anyone's wife. I think I'd like to know her again. So I completed the paperwork, updated my driver's license, changed bank records, updated business documents. When the new identification arrived, I sat in my car outside the government office staring at it. Sierra Hart. Same birth date, same face, same woman. And somehow not the same woman at all. That evening, Diane took me to dinner. To Sierra Hart, she said, raising her glass. I smiled. To whoever she turns out to be. She turned out to be busier than I expected. The business moved into a larger office. We hired an assistant, then another bookkeeper. I began speaking at small community workshops about financial organization for women approaching retirement. I joined a local business association. I traveled with Diane. Nothing extravagant. Charleston, Savannah, a week in Maine, places I had once assumed I would visit with Robert someday. At first, traveling without him felt like betrayal. Then I realized Robert had loved me too much to want his death to become mine. My social life changed too. Diane invited me to Thanksgiving. I hosted Christmas dinners for friends. The first Christmas in my cottage, I set the table for 6 people. Every chair was filled. When I brought out dessert, Diane complained that my pecan pie was unfairly good. Everyone laughed. For one dangerous second, I remembered the Christmas table with 3 plates and only one person. The memory hurt. But it did not destroy the evening. That was progress. I still thought about Nathan and Lauren. Of course I did. Changing your name does not change your heart. Every year on Nathan's birthday, I bought a card. I wrote something inside. Happy birthday. I hope this year brings you peace. I signed it Mom. Then I placed it in a box. I did the same for Lauren. I never mailed them. The first year, I wasn't sure why. By the 5th year, I understood. I needed somewhere for the love to go. The cards allowed me to acknowledge that I still cared without using that love as an excuse to knock on doors that had already been closed. The box grew. Cards, old photographs, a newspaper clipping about Nathan, a printout I once found mentioning Lauren's promotion, and beneath everything the yellow baby blanket I had made for Emily. Sometimes I opened the box. Most of the time I didn't. My children became people I loved from a distance. Then slowly years began passing without my measuring them by absence. I stopped thinking Nathan hasn't called in 5 years. Then 8, then 12. Life filled the spaces. Clients became friends. Employees had babies and brought them into the office. One young woman I mentored started calling me her financial fairy godmother. Diane became the person listed as my emergency contact. That change hurt the day I made it. But it also felt honest. One evening after we'd been in business nearly 10 years, Diane and I were locking the office. She stopped beside a framed photograph on the wall. It showed the two of us at a local small business award dinner. "You look happy there," she said. I was. No, I mean really happy. I studied the photograph. She was right. The woman smiling back at me wasn't waiting. That realization almost frightened me. For so many years, I had thought healing meant Nathan and Lauren eventually returning. I had imagined an apology as the finish line. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing their return to prove my life had value. I still wanted them. That was different. Wanting someone and needing them to validate your existence are not the same thing. By my 60th birthday, Sierra Hart had become more than a name on my driver's license. She was the woman who owned half a business, the woman who traveled, the woman people trusted, the woman who had friends around her birthday table. And yet, on the top shelf of my bedroom closet, 2 boxes remained. One held the cards I had never sent. The other held Robert's old estate documents. I rarely touched either. Until 7 years later, when a man named Charles Bennett called my office. His voice was formal. "Ms. Hart, I'm an estate attorney. I'm trying to reach the widow of Robert Collins." I gripped the telephone. "You found her." There was a pause. "Then I believe we need to discuss a piece of property your husband left behind." I looked toward the closed office door. For the first time in years, I thought about that dusty document box. "What property?" Charles answered carefully. "The land outside Asheville." My heart shifted. "What about it, Mrs. Collins?" "Hart, Ms. Hart. The circumstances around that land have changed considerably. I didn't know it then, but the past I had spent years learning to live without was about to find my new name. And somewhere far away, 2 children who had pretended their mother didn't exist were eventually going to discover that Sierra Hart had something they desperately wanted. When Charles Bennett mentioned the land outside Asheville, my first reaction wasn't excitement. It was irritation. That may sound strange considering what the property would eventually be worth, but at 60, I had finally reached a place where my life felt settled. I had spent years cleaning up the emotional debris left by Robert's death and my children's absence. The last thing I wanted was another piece of the past demanding attention. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Public records." "Which records?" Your legal name change made things slightly more complicated but not impossible. I smiled, despite myself. "So Sierra Hart didn't disappear very well." "I wasn't aware you were trying to disappear." "I wasn't. That mattered to me. I had never hidden. Nathan and Lauren could have found me at almost any point if they had genuinely wanted to." Charles continued. I believe you have documents related to Robert's interest in the property. I have a box. Good. Don't throw anything away. I've kept it this long. Then keep it a little longer. We scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday. That evening, I pulled the document box from the top shelf of my closet. Dust covered the lid. I carried it to the dining table and opened it. Rob scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday. That evening, I pulled the document box from the top shelf of my closet. Dust covered the lid. I carried it to the dining table and opened it. Robert's handwriting greeted me immediately. Land partnership papers, keep with estate documents. For a moment I could hear his voice. Robert had been one of those men who labeled everything. Extension cords, paint cans, tax folders. Once he labeled a kitchen drawer miscellaneous, and I told him labeling something miscellaneous defeated the purpose. He disagreed. I ran my finger across his handwriting. I kept them, I whispered. Then I began reading. Most of the language meant little to me. There were references to ownership percentages, partnership interests, easements, tax assessments, and something called the Collins Family Trust. That phrase caught my attention. I vaguely remembered signing documents years before Robert died. At the time, his work occasionally involved financial risk. Contractors were sued, projects failed, businesses changed hands. Robert had insisted we speak to an attorney. It's just protection, he'd told me. Protection from what life? I had laughed. Apparently Robert hadn't. Thursday morning I carried the entire box into Charles Bennett's office. Charles was in his 70s, thin, silver-haired, and dressed in the kind of suit that suggested he'd been practicing law since people still used carbon paper. He shook my hand. Ms. Hart, Sierra is fine. He glanced at the box. You brought everything. My husband trained me well. That produced a small smile. I knew Robert. I froze. You did not closely. My former partner handled much of his planning. I was involved in some of the trust documentation. I sat down slowly. You met him several times. There was something unexpectedly comforting about being in a room with a person who remembered Robert as more than a photograph. Charles opened the box. For nearly 20 minutes he sorted documents into piles. Finally, he unfolded an old survey. This is the property. The map showed a large area northwest of Asheville divided among several ownership interests. I leaned closer. I thought Robert owned a small piece. Not exactly. Charles pointed to several markings. He held a fractional interest through an investment arrangement. The structure changed over time. Is it worth anything? Charles looked at me. Yes. I waited. How much? That depends. I laughed. That is a very lawyer answer. It is also the accurate one. He explained that years earlier the land had been difficult to develop. Access was limited. Infrastructure was poor. Several owners disagreed about what to do with it. Then Asheville expanded. Road improvements changed access. Businesses moved outward. A development group had quietly begun acquiring neighboring parcels. Why they appear to be assembling land for a mixed-use project. How mixed commercial space, residential units, possibly hospitality. I looked again at the map. Robert's 3 pine trees and a headache had apparently become attractive. Charles continued. They've approached several interest holders. Have they approached me indirectly? That's part of why I contacted you. He slid a letter across the desk. The number on the preliminary proposal made me sit back. That can't be right. It isn't necessarily what you would receive. Good, because I was about to ask whether someone accidentally added a 0. Charles smiled. The ownership structure is complicated. How complicated? Complicated enough that you shouldn't sign anything without counsel. I stared at the letter. I had spent years helping women understand their finances. I had lectured clients about reading contracts, verifying ownership, and never assuming they understood an asset simply because it had been in the family for years. Now I was sitting in an attorney's office discovering I had done exactly that. What did Robert actually leave me? Charles folded his hands. That's where the trust becomes important. I looked at him. What trust? The Collins family trust. I remember paperwork. Barely. Robert transferred his interest in the land into the trust before his death. Why asset protection was part of it. Estate planning was another. I thought about Nathan's bitter comment after the funeral. I just thought Dad would have planned better. Apparently Robert had planned. We simply hadn't understood how. Charles continued. You are the primary beneficiary during your lifetime. I absorbed the sentence slowly. And Nathan and Lauren, his eyes lifted from the file. They are named in the documents. My chest tightened. How? As contingent beneficiaries. What does that mean? It means their interests are future interests and subject to the terms of the trust. I don't want to oversimplify until I've reviewed every amendment and related document. So they don't own this with me, not in the way people commonly mean when they say that. I sat back. For years I had avoided learning anything about my children because every discovery reopened a wound. Now their names were sitting inside a legal document on Charles Bennett's desk. Do they know I don't know? Would anyone have contacted them possibly at some point depending on how other ownership interests were researched? But as far as this trust is concerned, you're the person whose authority matters now. That sentence made me uncomfortable. Not powerful. Uncomfortable. I had spent so much of my life giving authority away that holding it felt unnatural. Charles must have seen something in my face. You don't have to make a decision today. Good. In fact, I recommend that you don't. Even better. He explained that the developer's offer might increase as more parcels were assembled. There were tax considerations, valuation questions, trust provisions. I listened carefully. Then I asked the question that had been growing in my mind. If Nathan and Lauren are contingent beneficiaries, could they find out about this? Yes. When potentially, whenever someone starts tracing Robert's estate interests carefully enough. I looked down at my hands. 23 years had not passed yet, but enough had passed that my children felt almost like characters from an earlier life. What happens if they contact me? Charles seemed surprised. They're your children. That wasn't my question. He paused. If they contact you regarding the property, don't sign anything and don't agree to anything until we review it. I almost laughed. Trust me, I'm no longer easily persuaded by the words, but we're family. Charles didn't ask. I appreciated that. Over the following months, the land became a strange background presence in my life. Appraisals were ordered, records were updated, more neighboring owners sold. The development group increased its interest. I still didn't sell. Diane thought I was remarkably calm. We were having dinner one evening when I showed her the latest valuation range. She nearly dropped her fork. Sierra. I know. You've been sitting across from me for 20 minutes talking about printer toner while this is happening. What am I supposed to do? Wear a crown? Yes, at minimum. I laughed. Then she became serious. What are you going to do? I don't know. Do you need the money? No. That answer felt wonderful. I wasn't rich, but I had enough. My cottage was paid for. The business was healthy. My retirement accounts were solid. I didn't need to make a desperate decision. Diane studied me. What about Nathan and Lauren? I looked toward the restaurant window. What about them? You said their names are connected somehow. Future beneficiaries. Do they know? I have no idea. Diane hesitated. If this becomes public enough, they might come looking. A younger Sierra would have felt hope. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe this will give us a reason to talk. Instead, I felt something colder. If they come because of the land, they aren't coming for me. Diane reached across the table. You don't know that. No. I looked at her hand over mine. But I know 20 years of evidence. A few weeks later, Charles called again. The developer was preparing another round of offers. During our conversation, he mentioned that inquiries had been made about Robert's heirs, by whom we don't know yet. It may simply be title research. My stomach tightened. That evening, I opened the box of birthday cards. There were almost 20 for Nathan, almost 20 for Lauren. I had written through anger, through grief, through birthdays when I barely thought about them until bedtime, through birthdays when I woke already missing them. I picked up the most recent card I'd written to Nathan. I hope wherever life has taken you, you've become someone you're proud to be. Love, Mom. I put it back. Then I walked to the other closet and touched Robert's document box. 2 boxes. One held all the love my children had never received. The other held an asset they might someday want. The irony was almost cruel. For decades, the first box had meant everything to me. The second had meant almost nothing. I wondered which one would matter to Nathan and Lauren. I would eventually get my answer. 7 years later, when I was 67, a waitress would approach my table in Asheville and tell me 2 people were asking for Sierra Collins. My children would finally find me. Not because of the birthday cards. Not because they wondered whether I was lonely. Not because Lauren wanted Emily to know her grandmother. Not because Nathan regretted telling people I was dead. They would find me because someone somewhere had finally attached enough dollar signs to Robert's forgotten land. And for the first time in 23 years, my children would suddenly need their mother to exist. For 23 years, I had imagined what I would say if Nathan and Lauren ever came back. In some versions, I was angry. In others, I was gracious. Sometimes Nathan apologized first. Sometimes Lauren cried before she could get a word out. In my softer moments, I imagined all 3 of us sitting together until the years between us became something we could finally talk about without bleeding. Not once in all those imaginary reunions did my son ask about property before asking about me. Yet there we were. Nathan and Lauren sat across from me in a restaurant in Asheville, and the first meaningful question my son had asked me in 23 years was whether I still owned something their father had left behind. "Do you still own Dad's property?" For several seconds, I simply looked at him. Nathan shifted in his chair. Age had changed him in ways photographs never could. His face was fuller. There were deep lines beside his mouth. Gray touched both temples. He wore an expensive watch and a navy jacket that probably cost more than Robert's first car. But when he became uncomfortable, he still pressed his lips together exactly as he had when he was a boy. Lauren sat beside him. She was 41 now. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. She wore a cream blouse beneath a tailored coat, and there was a thin gold bracelet around her wrist. She looked beautiful. That was the first thing my heart noticed. The second was how much she looked like me. Not the woman I was now. The woman I had been at 40. It was almost cruel. "Mom." The word came from Lauren. I had waited 23 years to hear it. Now it sounded strangely misplaced. I turned toward her. "Yes," she swallowed. "It's really you." I almost laughed. Instead I said, "Apparently." Nathan looked irritated by the direction of the conversation. "We should probably explain. That would be helpful." A waitress approached. Nathan immediately stopped talking. "Can I bring anyone something?" Lauren ordered coffee. Nathan asked for sparkling water. I already had tea in front of me. The waitress smiled and walked away. None of us spoke until she was gone. Then Nathan leaned forward. "There's a development project outside Asheville." "I know." That stopped him. "You know, yes. How much? How much what? How much do you know?" I looked at him. "Enough to know that you're going to have to be more specific." Lauren glanced at her brother. Nathan cleared his throat. "There's a parcel Dad had an interest in. I know that too." His confidence slipped another inch. For some reason, that made me sad rather than satisfied. He had come expecting a confused old woman. Maybe he imagined me living in some small apartment surrounded by unpaid bills, waiting for my successful children to rescue me from paperwork I didn't understand. He had no idea what I had spent the last 14 years doing. "There's a developer assembling the surrounding land," Nathan continued. "Yes. They're prepared to make a substantial offer. So I've been told." Lauren looked genuinely surprised. "You have an attorney?" I turned to her. "Yes, Lauren. I have an attorney." "I didn't mean I know exactly what you meant." Her cheeks reddened. I regretted the sharpness immediately. Not because it was undeserved. Because I didn't want this meeting to turn into 23 years of anger exploding in public. I had spent too long building peace to surrender it that easily. The waitress returned with their drinks. Nathan waited until she left again. "Okay. Good. That actually makes things easier. For whom? All of us." There it was. Us. A word they had apparently rediscovered alongside my address. Nathan pulled a folder from a leather bag beside his chair. I looked at it, but did not touch it. What is that information about the proposed sale? From whom the development group? And why do you have it? Nathan hesitated. Because Lauren and I were contacted. That interested me. When? Several months ago. Several months? Yes. And you've been looking for me since then, Lauren answered. We didn't know your name had changed. How inconvenient. Mom. I looked at her. There it was again. Mom. She used it carefully as though she hoped repetition might restore ownership. How did you find me? Lauren looked at Nathan. He said nothing. She took a breath. We hired someone. What kind of someone? A private investigator. For a moment I forgot the restaurant around us. You hired a private investigator to find your mother. We didn't know where you were. I stared at Lauren. You knew where I was for years. That was a long time ago. My phone number didn't change for 11 years. She looked down. The house was sold. Yes. We tried the old address. When neither answered, I leaned back. When did you try the old address? Nathan finally spoke. Last year. I almost smiled. 22 years after leaving me. What determination. The absurdity was almost impressive. So you hired an investigator? Lauren nodded. He found the name change. Sierra Hart. Yes. He found the business too. Another nod. Then you know I've been in Asheville all this time. Lauren's eyes filled with something I couldn't quite identify. Regret, perhaps, or embarrassment. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't ask. Nathan exhaled. Can we please not turn this into what? He stopped. I waited. Nothing. No, Nathan. Finish your sentence. We came here to discuss something important. I stared at him. More important than 23 years. His jaw tightened. Lauren whispered, Nate. He looked away. For a few seconds, I could hear dishes clattering from the kitchen and quiet conversation from nearby tables. Ordinary life continued around the strangest moment of mine. I folded my hands. Let's try something simpler. Neither spoke. Why now? Nathan looked confused. What? Why now? We told you. The property. I heard you. I looked at Lauren. Why not when I turned 50? She looked down. I turned to Nathan. Why not when I turned 60? He said nothing. Why not after your wedding? His face changed. He remembered Charlotte. Good. Why not when Emily was born? Lauren's eyes immediately filled with tears. I continued, though my voice remained calm. Why not when she turned 1? Mom 5. Lauren wiped beneath one eye. 10. Sierra, Nathan said. The name landed differently from Mom. More honest, perhaps. I looked at him. Why now? Nathan tapped one finger against the folder. Because there are deadlines. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. Not loudly. Just one short, stunned laugh. Deadlines. It's a complicated transaction. Of course. There are multiple owners involved. I understand. The developer needs clean title and cooperation from everyone connected to the parcel. And you believe I'm one of those people. We know you are. I tilted my head. Do you? Nathan's expression sharpened. What does that mean? It means you walked into this restaurant asking whether I still own your father's property before asking whether I'm healthy. Lauren closed her eyes. Nathan said nothing. You haven't asked where I live. Silence. You haven't asked what I've done for 23 years. Nothing. You haven't asked whether I remarried. Lauren looked up quickly. Did you? I smiled sadly. No. She seemed embarrassed. You haven't asked if I was sick, or happy, or lonely. My throat tightened on that last word, but I continued. You haven't even asked whether I wanted to be found. Nathan leaned back. We're here now. 4 words. 23 years compressed into 4 words. We're here now. I looked at my son and understood something that hurt more than his first question. Nathan believed his presence was the gift. He thought showing up erased the reason he had shown up. Lauren reached across the table. Her hand stopped before touching mine. I did wonder about you. I looked at the space between our hands. when she started crying quietly. I don't know. That's not an answer. I thought about calling. How many times she looked helpless. I don't know. Did you ever pick up the phone? No. I nodded. Thank you. For what? For telling me the truth. Nathan pushed the folder slightly closer. Mom, whatever happened before this deal could benefit everyone. I looked at the folder. How much? He glanced at Lauren. Potentially several million depending on how Dad's interest is divided. There it was. The number. The thing powerful enough to resurrect me. And you believe it's divided among the three of us. That was Dad's property. That isn't what I asked. Nathan paused. We're his heirs. I almost heard Robert laughing. Not because the situation was funny. Because Robert had always told Nathan never to assume ownership of something he hadn't earned or verified. Nathan apparently remembered none of that. Have you read the trust documents? I asked. Nathan's face changed. Only slightly. But enough. What trust documents? Lauren turned toward him. What is she talking about? Nathan ignored her. Dad didn't have some major trust. I lifted my tea. Are you sure he wasn't wealthy? I didn't say he was. Nathan stared at me. For the first time since entering the restaurant, he looked uncertain. I took a sip. The tea had gone cold. Lauren looked between us. Mom, what aren't you telling us? I set the cup down. Nothing that belongs in a restaurant. Nathan leaned forward. If there are documents, we need to see them. No. His eyebrows rose. No. You don't need anything from me today. You don't understand what's at stake. The sentence was almost identical to one he would repeat later. I looked at him. Then explain it. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. There was more. The property wasn't simply an unexpected inheritance. Nathan needed this transaction. Lauren did too. I could see it now in the way they exchanged glances whenever money came up. What have you done? I asked. Nathan's expression hardened. Nothing. Don't lie to me. Lauren whispered his name. Nathan. He looked at her. Something silent passed between them. Then he turned back to me. This isn't the place. Finally, something we agree on. I reached into my purse and placed cash beside my unfinished tea. Nathan looked surprised. You're leaving, yes. We drove all this way. I stood. So did I once. He understood. Charlotte. The watch. The mother he'd declared dead because explaining me had been inconvenient. Lauren stood too. Please. I looked at my daughter. For a moment I saw the 18-year-old girl who used to steal my sweaters. Then I saw the woman who had kept my granddaughter from me. Both were real. That was the hardest part. I'll meet with you again, I said. Nathan immediately relaxed. Good. Not alone. His expression changed. My attorney will be there. Fine. And before that meeting, I want everything. Everything what? Every document you've received. Every conversation you've had with the developer. Every financial commitment you've made based on this land. Nathan became very still. Lauren looked at him. That confirmed my suspicion. There was something they had not told me. Something bigger than greed. Something urgent. I picked up my purse. Nathan said, Mom, don't make this personal. I looked at him for several seconds. Then I said quietly, You came looking for the mother. You pretended was dead because you need her signature. I glanced at the folder. You made it personal 23 years ago. I walked away. My hands did not begin shaking until I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to laugh. Mostly I felt an extraordinary clarity. My children had finally found me. And they had found Sierra Hart, not the frightened widow they had abandoned. They still didn't understand the difference. But they would. Because before I signed anything, I intended to discover exactly why two people who had lived perfectly well without their mother for 23 years suddenly couldn't afford to do so for another day. By the time I reached my cottage, Nathan had called 4 times. Lauren had called twice. I answered neither of them. Not because I was trying to punish them. I needed silence. For 23 years, whenever my children created an emergency, I had responded before asking whether it was actually mine to solve. Nathan needed rent money. I sent it. Lauren needed reassurance. I stayed awake. Someone needed transportation, tuition advice, forgiveness, patience. I gave. That afternoon, sitting in my driveway with my phone vibrating inside my purse, I realized how easily the old Sierra could return. All Nathan had to say was, "Mom, I need you." That sentence had controlled me for decades, so I left the phone in my purse and went inside. Diane came over that evening. I hadn't told her Nathan and Lauren were coming to Asheville because until I saw them standing in the restaurant entrance, part of me hadn't believed they actually would. Now she sat across from me at the kitchen table while I described the meeting. When I finished, she was silent. That was unusual for Diane. Finally, she said, 23 years. Yes. And the first thing he asked about was the land, yes. Diane stared into her coffee. I don't know whether to hug you or drive to Charlotte and commit a misdemeanor. I laughed despite myself. Please choose the hug. She did. That was when I finally cried. Not for long. Just enough to release something I'd been holding since Lauren said Mom in the restaurant. Diane waited until I sat down again. What happens now? I find out what they're not telling me. You think there's more, I know there is. Nathan had been too urgent. Lauren had been too frightened. People who unexpectedly discover a possible inheritance are excited. My children looked cornered. The next morning I called Charles Bennett. I found the heirs you warned me about. He was quiet for half a second. Your children contacted you. They hired a private investigator. That is determined. Money can be very motivating. I explained what had happened. When I mentioned Nathan's folder, Charles interrupted. Did you sign anything? No. Did you take any documents? No. Good. I told them the next meeting would be with you. Even better. Then I asked Charles, can they do anything with that property without me? Not legitimately through the trust. What if they believe they already own part of it? That belief doesn't create ownership. I thought about Nathan's face when I mentioned the trust. He didn't know. That doesn't surprise me. I think he's made financial decisions assuming he'll get money from this sale. Charles paused. That would be unwise. Unwise seems to run in the family. Not the entire family. I smiled. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. Before hanging up, Charles said, ask them to provide every document they've received. I already did. Another pause. Sierra, you've become rather good at this. I've had practice cleaning up other people's financial assumptions. What I didn't say was that I'd spent years helping women recognize when family pressure was being disguised as financial necessity. Now I was about to find out whether I could follow my own advice. Nathan emailed the documents that afternoon. There were dozens of pages. Developer correspondence, preliminary valuations, maps, title research, letters referencing Robert's former interest. I printed everything and started reading. 3 hours later, I found the first problem. A forwarded email from Nathan to a financial advisor contained one sentence that made my stomach tighten. Expected family distribution following Asheville land disposition should provide sufficient liquidity. Expected family distribution. Nathan had already counted the money. I kept reading. Another email referred to a real estate investment Nathan had entered 6 months earlier. Then another. By midnight, the outline was becoming clear. Nathan had invested heavily in a development partnership near Charlotte. The deal required additional capital at specific stages. His expected proceeds from Robert's land were apparently part of his plan to cover those obligations. He hadn't merely hoped for an inheritance. He had built financial commitments around it. The next morning, Lauren sent a separate email. Mom, there are a few things Nathan didn't explain well yesterday. Can I come see you alone? I stared at the message. My first instinct was to say yes. Then I remembered the restaurant. No more secret versions of the truth. I replied, we will all speak together at Charles Bennett's office. Please send any financial documents relevant to your interest in the property before then. An hour later, Lauren sent several attachments. Her situation was different, but no less troubling. She and her husband had borrowed money to invest in expanding a wellness business connected to the medical spa industry. Some of the borrowing appeared to have been made with the expectation that Lauren would soon receive a significant inheritance distribution. Nobody had formally pledged the land, they couldn't, but they had behaved as if future money were guaranteed. I sat back in my office chair. My children had spent 23 years pretending I didn't exist. Then they had made financial decisions that depended on my existence. The irony was almost too perfect. The meeting at Charles's office was scheduled for Thursday. Nathan and Lauren arrived together. I was already there. Nathan placed his leather bag beside the chair. Lauren avoided my eyes. Charles greeted everyone professionally. Before he could begin, I spoke. I want the truth first. Nathan sighed. Mom, we've sent you everything. No. You've sent me documents. What else do you want? I want you to explain why this sale is so urgent. Nathan glanced at Charles. This is a family matter. Charles remained expressionless. I represent your mother in matters involving the trust. Anything relevant to pressure being placed on her regarding trust property is appropriately discussed here. Nathan's jaw tightened. I almost admired Charles's ability to say stop manipulating my client in legal language. I turned to my son. How much money have you committed? He looked at me. It's not that simple. It usually is. I invested in a project. How much, Mom? Nathan. He exhaled. About 400,000. Lauren looked at him sharply. You told me 3. Some additional capital was required. I felt my stomach drop. $400,000? It's not gone. I didn't say it was. The project is solid. Then why do you need Robert's land money? Nathan's silence answered me. There's another capital call, I said. He looked surprised. I tapped the papers in front of me. I read what you sent. Yes. How much? 180,000. And when is it due? 6 weeks. There it was. The deadline. I turned to Lauren. And you? She looked ashamed. Our situation isn't as bad. That wasn't my question. She folded her hands tightly. We borrowed against the house. How much? 225,000. My heart sank. For the business, she nodded. My husband and I thought we'd be able to pay a large portion back after the land sale. You thought. We were told Dad's interest might be worth millions. Who told you that, Nathan? I looked at my son. He immediately defended himself. The preliminary title information listed Dad's estate and heirs. It was reasonable to assume. My voice was quiet. He stopped. It was reasonable to investigate. It was not reasonable to spend money you didn't own. Nathan leaned forward. You don't understand how much is riding on this. There it was. Exactly the sentence I had been waiting for. I looked at him. You're right. He seemed surprised. I don't understand. I let the silence settle. Because for 23 years, neither of you thought I deserved to know what was riding on anything in your lives. Lauren looked down. You didn't tell me when you got married, Nathan. He said nothing. You didn't tell me when you changed careers. Nothing. I looked at Lauren. You didn't tell me you were pregnant. Her eyes filled. You didn't tell me Emily was born until 3 days later. I know. But now I'm supposed to understand your mortgages, investments, and deadlines because my signature became useful. Mom, that's not fair, Lauren whispered. I looked at her. Fair, she wiped at her cheek. We were young when this started. That sentence reached somewhere deep inside me. You were. I nodded. You were young when you stopped calling. Lauren looked relieved for half a second. Then I continued. But you weren't young for 23 years. Nobody moved. You weren't 18 every morning for 23 years, Lauren. She began crying. You weren't 21 every Christmas, Nathan. He looked away. 23 years isn't one mistake. My voice shook now. It is thousands of choices. Thousands of mornings when neither of you called. Thousands of evenings when you knew where I lived. Birthdays, Christmases, your wedding, Emily's birth, Robert's anniversaries, my birthdays. I looked at both of them. You had more than 8,000 days to wonder whether your mother was alive. Nathan rubbed his forehead. This isn't going anywhere. It is. Where to the truth? I pushed the papers toward him. You didn't come back because you missed me. He said nothing. You came because you spent money that you thought belonged to you. That isn't the whole story. Then tell me the rest. Silence. Lauren looked at Nathan. He looked back at her. Again, that private communication between siblings. The same bond I had discovered through Christmas photographs decades earlier. I suddenly understood there was still something they were withholding. Charles must have sensed it too. He closed the file in front of him. Before we discuss the trust structure, he said, I think Mrs. Hart's question deserves an answer. Nathan looked annoyed. Lauren looked frightened. Finally, she whispered, We thought you might be dead. The room became very still. I stared at her. You thought I might be dead. We didn't know. You could have checked. I know, Nathan interrupted. We're not proud of how things happened. I turned to him. You told Vanessa I was dead when you knew perfectly well I wasn't. His face tightened. That was different. No, it wasn't. I looked at Lauren again. If you believed I might have died, when did you start looking? She couldn't answer. I already knew. When the land became valuable. I leaned back. For years I had wondered what it would take for my children to remember me. Illness age. Their own children regret love. Now I had the answer. A multi-million-dollar property transaction. Charles opened another folder. I believe we should clarify one assumption before this conversation continues. Nathan straightened. What assumption? The assumption that either of you currently owns a share of Robert Collins's land interest. Nathan frowned. We're his heirs. Charles nodded calmly. You are named in Robert's estate planning. Exactly. But that does not mean what you appear to believe it means. Lauren stopped crying. Nathan stared at him. Charles placed a thick document on the table. Across the front were the words, The Collins Family Trust. I recognized Robert's signature near the bottom. Charles looked at Nathan and Lauren. Your father planned more carefully than either of you realized. Nathan glanced at me. For the first time since he'd returned, I saw something in his face that had been missing. Fear. And I understood that the conversation about money was about to become something much larger. Because my children had already borrowed against an inheritance they had never actually inherited. For several seconds, nobody touched the document. The Collins Family Trust. The words sat between us like a locked door. Nathan was the first to speak. What exactly is that? Charles Bennett adjusted his glasses. A trust agreement your father established during his lifetime. I know what a trust is. Then this should be relatively straightforward. Under different circumstances, I might have smiled. Nathan didn't. He leaned toward the document. Dad didn't have enough money for some complicated trust. Charles's expression remained neutral. A trust is a legal structure, Mr. Collins. It is not proof that someone was wealthy. Nathan glanced at me. Did you know about this? I knew Robert had done estate planning. That's not what I asked. I signed documents years ago. I didn't understand every detail. So you didn't know. I knew enough not to spend money I didn't own. Lauren closed her eyes. I immediately regretted the cruelty in my tone. Not the truth, the cruelty. There was a difference, and I had promised myself years earlier that if my children ever returned, I would not become the ugliest version of myself, simply because they had once given me permission to. I'm sorry, I said to Lauren. She looked surprised. That was unnecessary. Nathan stared at me as if apologizing during an argument was some strange language he had forgotten. Charles opened the trust. Perhaps we should focus on the documents. He turned several pages. Robert established the original trust approximately 27 years ago. There were amendments afterward, but the basic structure remained consistent. Why, Lauren asked. Asset protection and estate planning. Your father worked in construction. Some of his investments and business relationships carried potential liability. I remembered Robert sitting at our kitchen table all those years ago. It's just protection. Protection from what life? I had laughed. Now I wished I could tell him he had been right. Charles continued. One asset transferred into the trust was Robert's fractional interest in the land outside Asheville. Nathan leaned forward. So Dad did own it. An interest in it, yes. And when he died, the trust continued. Nathan frowned. But we're his children. Charles looked directly at him. Yes. So his share passes to us. No. The word landed hard. Nathan blinked. What not at your father's death? Lauren turned toward Charles. Then who owns it? The trust owns the interest. Nathan shook his head. Fine. Who benefits from the trust? Charles looked at me. Sierra is the primary lifetime beneficiary. The room became very quiet. Nathan's face changed, not dramatically, just enough that I could see his mind trying to rearrange everything he had assumed. Lauren asked, "What does that mean exactly?" Charles answered carefully. "It means that under the trust terms, your mother holds the primary beneficial interest during her lifetime, subject to the trust provisions. Decisions regarding the property are governed accordingly." Nathan looked at me. "So Mom controls it," Charles corrected him. "The trust controls the asset. Your mother has the rights granted to her under the trust, which means you should stop thinking of the property as something currently belonging 1/3 to each of you." Nathan sat back. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect legal sense. We were listed as heirs. You are beneficiaries. Same thing." "No." Charles said it so calmly that Nathan had nowhere to push his anger. Lauren looked at the document. "What are we contingent beneficiaries?" She repeated the phrase quietly. "Contingent. Yes. Meaning, your potential interests arise later and are subject to the trust terms." Nathan's face hardened. "Later when—" Charles paused. "Primarily after your mother's lifetime interest ends." Nobody spoke. I felt no satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. For years I had imagined justice as a feeling. I thought if my children ever understood how badly they had hurt me, something inside me would finally relax. But sitting there watching Nathan realize that the money he had already counted did not belong to him, I felt mostly tired. He was still my son. His mistakes still frightened me. That was the terrible inconvenience of love. It did not disappear simply because someone deserved consequences. Nathan leaned forward again. "Can she sell?" Charles looked at me before answering. "The property interest can potentially be sold through the appropriate trust process. And if it sells, the money goes where into the trust. Then Mom gets it. Sierra has rights to distributions and benefits according to the trust." Nathan rubbed his jaw. "So eventually Lauren and I inherit whatever remains." Charles closed the document halfway. "That is broadly possible, but I would strongly caution you against planning your finances around assumptions about another person's estate." The irony was almost painful. Nathan looked at me. "How much is the land actually worth?" Charles hesitated. "We've received updated valuation information." "How much?" Nathan Lauren whispered. "No, I want to know." Charles turned to me. I nodded. He opened another folder. "The development group has increased its preliminary offer. After accounting for the fractional ownership structure and assuming the proposed assembly, closes under approximately the current terms. The trust's interest could be valued in the neighborhood of $4.8 million. Lauren inhaled sharply. Nathan didn't move. I thought I had misheard. 4.8? Charles nodded. Approximately. That is not a guaranteed net amount. There would be transaction costs, tax considerations, and other factors. I barely heard the rest. $4.8 million. Robert's 3 pine trees and a headache. I almost laughed. Instead, I felt tears sting my eyes. Not because of the money, because I suddenly pictured Robert at 40. Work boots near the back door, pencil behind his ear, trying to build something secure for people he loved. He had died believing those people would remain a family. He could never have imagined this room. Nathan recovered first. "Then this is even more important." I looked at him. Of course that was what he heard. Not Dad protected Mom. Not we made a terrible assumption. 4.8 million. Nathan, I said quietly. The developer wants the entire assembly. If one interest doesn't cooperate, it complicates everything. I understand. So we need to move. His mouth tightened. Mom. No. Explain we. The family. I stared at him. The family. Yeah. Interesting. Lauren wiped her face. Please don't. I turned to her. Don't what? Make every word into a weapon. That stopped me. She was right. I leaned back. All right. Nathan looked between us. What does that mean? It means I'm listening. Good. Because if this sale happens soon, everybody benefits. How the trust receives the proceeds. Yes. You're secure. I already am. He paused. And eventually, whatever remains passes according to the trust. Eventually. He hated that word. I could see it. Nathan had built his life around acceleration. Buy now. Invest now. Grow now. Leverage tomorrow for today. Robert had been the opposite. Save, document, protect, wait. For the first time, I wondered whether Nathan's resentment toward his father had come partly from never understanding that patience itself was a form of wealth. Charles turned a few pages. There is another matter. Nathan looked at him. What before any decision we need to review the trust amendments and confirm Sierra's estate planning wishes? Nathan frowned. Why? Because circumstances have changed considerably since Robert drafted these documents. What circumstances? Charles looked at him over his glasses. 23 years for one. Lauren stared at the table. Nathan crossed his arms. This shouldn't become some emotional referendum on our family. I felt something inside me harden. Not anger, clarity. You made financial commitments based on money you believed you would inherit from me. From Dad. No. My voice remained calm. That's the part you still don't understand. I pointed toward the trust. Your father protected me first. Nathan said nothing. You spent 23 years behaving as though I was already dead. His eyes shifted away. And now you've discovered that legally, financially, and inconveniently, I'm still very much alive. Lauren covered her mouth. Nathan's face reddened. That's not fair. Neither was telling people I was dead, Sierra Charles said gently. I stopped. He was right to interrupt. This was not the place to settle every wound. I looked at Nathan. You need $180,000 in 6 weeks. He didn't answer. I looked at Lauren. You borrowed against your house expecting this sale. She nodded. I understand that both of you are frightened. Nathan looked surprised. But your fear does not create an obligation for me. Mom. No. I held up one hand. I am not saying I won't sell. That silenced him. I'm saying I will make the decision based on whether it is right for the trust and for my life. Not because you made promises using money you did not own. Lauren nodded slowly. Nathan did not. Charles began gathering the documents. I think that's enough for today. Nathan looked at him. We haven't resolved anything. Charles replied. Actually, we've resolved the most important misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? That you and your sister presently own part of this property. Nathan stared at him. You don't. The words landed harder the second time. Nathan stood. Lauren remained seated. He picked up his bag. This is unbelievable. I looked at him. What is that Dad would structure things this way? That sentence finally made me angry. Your father structured things exactly the way a husband who loved his wife should. Nathan froze. I'm not as sure I could not be pushed aside after he died. My voice trembled. He didn't know who would do the pushing. Nathan looked away. Lauren began crying again. I stood. We're done today. Nathan walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned. You're really going to let us lose everything over this? I looked at my son. No. He waited. You are going to experience whatever happens because of decisions you made before you bothered to learn what belonged to you. He left. Lauren remained behind for a few seconds. Then she stood. At the doorway, she looked back at me. Yes, there's something you still don't know. My stomach tightened. About the money. She shook her head. About us. Nathan called her name from the hallway. Lauren looked toward him, then back at me. For a moment I thought she would finally say it. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Then she followed her brother. I watched the doorway after they disappeared. Charles stood beside me. "What do you think she meant?" I looked at the empty hall. "I don't know. But I remembered Christmas. Nathan and Lauren together. The years of coordinated silence. The way they always seemed to know more about each other's lives than I did. And suddenly a possibility I had spent 23 years avoiding became impossible to ignore. Maybe my children hadn't simply drifted away from me. Maybe they had chosen it together. For 3 nights after the meeting at Charles Bennett's office, I kept hearing Lauren's last words. "There's something you still don't know. About us." I had spent 23 years filling silence with explanations. They were young. They were grieving. Nathan was ambitious. Lauren was overwhelmed. Their lives became busy. Distance became habit. Habit became years. Those explanations had hurt, but they had allowed me to preserve one comforting belief. Nobody had deliberately decided to erase me. On Sunday afternoon, Lauren called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Hello, Mom." "Yes." Her voice was quiet. "Can Nathan and I come over?" I looked around my cottage. My home. The one place in my life that had never contained their rejection. Why we need to talk. About the land numb. I waited. About what I almost told you. My stomach tightened. "When today, if you'll let us." I should have suggested Charles's office. Instead, I said 4 o'clock. They arrived at 3:57. Nathan drove. Of course he did. I watched from the window as they sat in the car for nearly a minute before getting out. For once, Nathan wasn't carrying his leather bag. No folders, no contracts. Lauren held nothing either. I opened the door. Nathan looked around the living room after entering. "This is nice. Thank you. How long have you lived here? 14 years. His face changed. He hadn't known. Lauren noticed photographs on a bookshelf. Diane and me in Savannah. A Christmas dinner. Employees from the business. A picture of me standing beside the ocean in Maine. My children appeared in none of them. Lauren touched one frame. "You traveled, yes. With Diane sometimes." Nathan sat down. I remained standing. "You wanted to talk." Lauren looked at her brother. "You tell her." Nathan's expression hardened. "You were the one who wanted to do this. Because you should have told her years ago. Both of you stop." They looked at me. I sat across from them. "Whatever this is, I don't want another performance where you decide who gets to say which part. Just tell me the truth." Lauren's hands began trembling. Nathan stared at the floor. Finally, I asked the question that had been waiting 23 years. "Did you decide together to stop speaking to me?" Neither answered. That was enough. Still, I needed the words. "Nathan." He rubbed his palms together. "It wasn't like that. How was it we didn't sit down one day and say, 'Let's never speak to Mom again'?" "Then what did you say?" He looked at Lauren. She was crying already. "Tell her," Lauren whispered. Nathan exhaled. "After Dad died, everything felt." He searched for a word. "Small." I stared at him. "What does that mean, Asheville?" "The house. Money always being discussed. Dad working constantly. Your father worked because he was supporting us. I know that now. Did you not know it then? I thought there should have been more." The same resentment. 23 years old and still alive inside him. More what? Money. Opportunity. Connections. Something. I looked at him. "You thought we failed you." Nathan didn't answer. Lauren did. Yes. The honesty was brutal. I turned toward her. "You too." She wiped her face. "I was 18. You were 18 when it started." "I know." "What happened after that?" Lauren looked down. When I got to college, everyone seemed to come from these families that knew how things worked. What things? Careers. Money. Social circles. And we didn't. I thought we didn't." My chest tightened. She continued. I started telling people I was from North Carolina, but I stopped talking about home. Why? Because I was embarrassed. There it was. A simple word containing decades of pain. Of me, not you exactly. I almost laughed. Please don't protect me now. She closed her eyes. Yes, sometimes. I nodded slowly. At least the truth had finally arrived. Nathan leaned forward. When Lauren and I talked, we kept reinforcing it. Reinforcing that we needed to move forward. Without me. He said nothing. Lauren answered, yes. I stared at them. So Christmas wasn't an accident. Lauren began sobbing. No. The party. No. You knew I was waiting. Nathan looked away. You knew I had cooked. I didn't know how much you knew I was expecting you. Yes. My hands went cold, and afterward Nathan said it became easier not to deal with it. Easier. Again. That word. It was easier to tell Vanessa I was dead. It was easier not to explain where he came from. It was easier not to deal with me. I looked at my son. You have built an extraordinary amount of your life around what was easier. His face tightened. I know. No. I don't think you do. Lauren reached for a tissue. I should have stopped it. I turned to her. You weren't following Nathan. You made choices too. I know. Did you ever talk about calling me? She nodded. How often I don't know. Once a year sometimes. Once every 5 years. She cried harder. Mom, please. No, I need to know. Nathan interrupted. What difference does the number make? I turned on him. Because I spent 23 years wondering whether you had forgotten me. Silence. I need to understand whether my children forgot their mother or remembered her and chose silence. Nathan's face collapsed slightly. We remembered. Those 2 words hurt more than I expected. I nodded. Thank you. Lauren looked horrified. Why are you thanking him? Because I've waited 23 years for an honest answer. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, my neighbor was watering flowers. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The world had the audacity to remain ordinary. Behind me, Lauren spoke. Emily asked about you. I turned around. What? Her face was wet with tears. When she was little, I could barely speak. What did you tell her? Lauren looked down. What did you tell my granddaughter? That you weren't part of our family? The room seemed to tilt. I sat down because my knees suddenly felt unreliable. How old was she the first time? 6. 6. I pictured a little girl with Lauren's eyes asking about her grandmother. Did she ask if I was dead? Lauren covered her mouth. That was answer enough. What did you say? I said you lived somewhere else. Did you tell her I wanted to know her? No. Did you tell her I came to Atlanta when she was born? Lauren shook her head. Did you tell her about the blanket? I didn't know about the blanket until recently. I closed my eyes. That was true. The blanket had never reached the hospital. It had lived in my closet instead. Nathan spoke quietly. Mom, we can't change it. I opened my eyes. No. For once we agreed. You can't. He looked at me. But you can stop asking me to pretend it happened by accident. Nathan nodded. Lauren was crying so hard she could barely breathe evenly. I don't know how I became that person. I looked at my daughter. I do. She stared at me. You became her one choice at a time. She flinched. So did I. That surprised them. I continued. I became the woman who kept accepting it one choice at a time. Every time you didn't call, I invented an excuse. Every time you hurt me, I decided being your mother meant I had to absorb it. I looked between them. We all became people we didn't recognize. Nathan's voice was quiet. Is there any way back? I thought about it. No. Lauren began crying again. I raised my hand. There is no way back. I looked around my cottage, and I don't want one. Nathan frowned. What does that mean? I don't want the old family back. The old family produced this. Neither spoke. If there is ever going to be anything between us, it has to be something new. Lauren looked at me. Can there be? I don't know. It was the most honest answer I could give. Nathan stood and walked toward the fireplace. After a moment, he turned. If the land didn't exist, do you think we'd be here? Lauren whispered Nathan. But I was grateful, he asked. I looked directly at him. Would you? He stared at me. Seconds passed. Then he lowered his eyes. I don't know. There it was. The answer I had needed. Not the answer I wanted, the true one. I turned to Lauren. What about you? She cried silently. I want to say yes, but I don't know either. I nodded. Then that's where we start. Nathan looked confused. With what the truth? No forced forgiveness, no miraculous reunion, no pretending money hadn't opened the door. Just truth. They left shortly after 6. At the doorway, Lauren turned. Mom. Yes, I'm sorry I told Emily you weren't family. I looked at her. That may be the thing I forgive last. She nodded. I understand. I watched them drive away. Then I returned to the living room. For years I had wondered what terrible thing I had done to lose my children. Now I knew. There had been no terrible thing, no hidden betrayal, no misunderstanding. Nathan and Lauren had wanted to become people who did not resemble where they came from, and I had become the easiest symbol of that past to remove. Strangely, the truth did not destroy me. It released me. Their rejection had never been proof that I was unworthy of love. It had been proof of who they had chosen to become. The next morning I called Diane. I need a favor. What kind? I want Nathan and Lauren to see the office. There was a pause. Why, I looked toward the box of birthday cards on my dining table. Because they think they know what happened during those 23 years. And they know what they did. I touched the top card. They don't know what I did. 2 days later, I invited my children to the business I had built without them. They were expecting a bookkeeping office. What they were about to see was an entire life. And when Lauren asked Diane who she was to me, the answer would finally show my children something $4.8 million never could. They had spent 23 years pretending I wasn't family. I had spent those same 23 years learning that family could still find me. 2 days later, Nathan and Lauren walked into the life I had built without them. I arrived at the office early that morning. Not because I needed to prepare anything. Everything I wanted them to see was already there. That was the point. I wasn't staging a performance. I wasn't arranging photographs or asking employees to behave differently. For 23 years, my children had imagined my life only through absence. If they thought of me at all, I suspected they pictured the woman they had left behind in that old Asheville house. The widow, the mother, the woman waiting beside the telephone. They had never met Sierra Hart. At 9:30, Diane appeared in my doorway holding 2 coffees. You look nervous. I am. Want me to throw them out if they upset you? I smiled. You're 70 years old. And Nathan is 6 feet tall. I have excellent aim with a stapler. I laughed. That helped. Diane put 1 coffee on my desk. Why do you really want them here? I thought about the question. Because I don't want them believing the land is the most important thing they missed. Diane studied me. Then she nodded. At 10, the receptionist called. Your guests are here. My guests. Not my children. Something about that made me sad. Send them in. Nathan entered first. Lauren followed. Nathan wore another expensive suit, but without the leather bag this time. Progress, I supposed. Lauren looked tired. Her eyes moved immediately around the office. Our company occupied most of the 2nd floor now. What had begun in 2 rented rooms had grown into a bright workspace with 7 employees, a conference room and a small training area, where we held financial workshops. On one wall were framed certificates and local business awards. On another were photographs from community events. Nathan stopped in front of one. It showed Diane and me standing beside several women at a workshop. What is this, a financial literacy program? You teach sometimes? Lauren looked at another photograph. You never told us. I almost answered sharply. You never asked. But I didn't need to. Lauren's face changed. She had heard the sentence anyway. One of my employees passed the doorway. Morning, Sierra. Morning, Amy. Client meeting at 11 is confirmed. Thank you. Nathan watched her leave. How many people work here? 7, including Diane and me. You own this half. His eyebrows rose. With Diane, yes. Lauren walked toward a shelf containing framed letters and photographs. What do you actually do? We help small businesses organize financial systems. Bookkeeping, cash flow organization, payroll coordination records. We also work with individuals who need help understanding household finances. Nathan looked genuinely surprised. You built all this, Diane and I did. How long? 14 years. 14 years. The number landed. 14 years during which neither of them had known where I worked. 14 years during which they had not once asked. Lauren picked up a framed photograph. I was standing between two younger women at a community awards dinner. You look... She stopped. What happy? The word was almost an accusation. I smiled gently. I was. She put the frame down. Nathan walked toward my office window. I thought you retired. From what? He turned. I don't know. Bookkeeping. I did for a while. And then I discovered I wasn't finished. Lauren sat in the chair opposite my desk. Why Sierra Hart? I leaned against the desk. Hart was my maiden name. I know. I started using it professionally. Eventually I changed it legally. Nathan looked at me. Because of us, partly. His jaw tightened. That's dramatic. Diane entered before I could answer. Good morning. Nathan turned. Lauren stood. I introduced them. This is Diane Parker, my business partner. Diane shook Nathan's hand. Then Lauren's. Lauren looked at the photograph she had been holding earlier. You've known my mother a long time, long enough to know she makes terrible pottery. I laughed. It was one bowl. It leaned. It had character. For a few seconds the room felt almost normal. Then Lauren asked, Are you close? Diane glanced at me. Very. How close? The question sounded childish, almost vulnerable. Diane answered simply, Family. Lauren froze. Nathan looked toward me. Nobody said anything. Family. One word. No biology. No inheritance. No shared last name. Just presence. Diane must have sensed the weight of the moment. She touched my shoulder. I'll give you some privacy. After she left, Lauren remained standing. Family. I nodded. She was there. The words came out before I could soften them. Lauren looked down. I continued more gently. She was there when I sold the house, when we started the business, when I changed my name, when I turned 60, when I had pneumonia 3 winters ago. Lauren's head lifted. You had pneumonia, yes. Were you hospitalized for 2 nights? Her face went pale. Who was your emergency contact? I looked toward the door Diane had just closed. Lauren understood. She sat down. Oh. That tiny sound contained more pain than an apology. Nathan crossed his arms. You could have contacted us. I stared at him. Could I? He looked away. No, Nathan. Tell me. Which number should the hospital have called? Silence. The son who told his wife his mother was dead. His face tightened. Or the daughter who told her child I wasn't part of the family. Lauren began crying. I immediately regretted the cruelty again. This wasn't why I had brought them here. I don't want to fight. Nathan looked at me. Then why are we here? Because there is something I want you to see. I walked to a cabinet behind my desk. Inside was the box. Not Robert's documents. The other one. I carried it to the conference table. Lauren watched me place it down. What is that, 23 years? Nathan frowned. I opened the lid. The first layer contained photographs. Old ones. Nathan on a bicycle. Lauren at graduation. Robert holding both children at the Blue Ridge Parkway. Beneath those were envelopes. Dozens. Lauren picked one up. Her name was written on the front. She looked at me. What are these birthday cards? Nathan picked up another. The year was written discreetly in one corner. You kept these, I wrote one every year. Why didn't you send them? I sat down. Because I finally understood that loving you didn't require me to keep knocking. Lauren opened hers. I didn't stop her. Inside I had written, Happy 34th birthday, sweetheart. I hope you have people around you who make you feel seen and loved. Wherever you are, I still remember the little girl who was afraid of thunderstorms. Love, Mom. Lauren pressed the card against her mouth. Nathan opened one of his. He read silently. Then another. His face changed. Not anger. Something quieter. Grief, perhaps. You did this every year. Yes. Even after Charlotte, yes. Why? Because you were still my son. He looked down. I thought you hated me. That surprised me. No. You should have. Hate would have required too much of my life. Lauren was going through the box now. Then she found the yellow blanket. She stopped. Her fingers touched the embroidered E. What is this? My throat tightened. The blanket I made for Emily. Lauren looked at me. The hospital. Yes. You brought this? It was on the passenger seat. She unfolded it. 23 years of storage had softened the yellow slightly, but the stitching remained. Lauren traced the E. You kept it all this time. I couldn't throw it away. She began sobbing. Not quietly this time. Her shoulders shook. I wanted to comfort her. That instinct came instantly. Motherhood does not ask permission before returning. I stood and walked toward her. Then I stopped. For years I had rushed to erase every uncomfortable consequence my children experienced. This grief belonged to Lauren. She needed to feel it. So I stayed close without rescuing her. I told Emily you didn't care, she whispered. The sentence cut through me. What when she was older? Lauren struggled to breathe evenly. She asked why she'd never met you. I told her you had chosen another life. Nathan looked at his sister. You never told me that. I was ashamed. She looked at me. I made you the one who left. I closed my eyes. For 1 second anger flooded through me. Then I opened them. Why? Because the truth made me look terrible. There it was, the pattern again. Nathan had declared me dead because the truth about his background embarrassed him. Lauren had made me the abandoning grandmother because the truth about her choices embarrassed her. I sat beside the blanket. You both kept rewriting me whenever the truth became inconvenient. Neither argued. I picked up one of the cards. I need you to understand something. They looked at me. I never stopped loving you. Lauren cried harder. Nathan's eyes filled, though he refused to let the tears fall. But I stopped proving it to people who had already decided it didn't matter. The room became silent. I looked around at the office beyond the glass wall. People working, phones ringing, a printer humming. My life. I used to think surviving meant waiting long enough for you to come back. I looked at Nathan. Then I learned surviving wasn't enough. I looked at Lauren. I wanted to live. Lauren folded this blanket carefully. Can I give this to Emily? The question surprised me. I touched the embroidered corner. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. Another part understood that this blanket had become more than a gift. Not yet. Lauren nodded. No argument. That mattered. Nathan placed his birthday cards back into the box. Then he looked at me. What are you going to do with the trust? There it was. For 1 second, disappointment returned. But his tone was different. Less demanding. Almost afraid. I don't know yet. Are you going to cut us out? I haven't decided. Lauren wiped her face. You should. Nathan turned sharply. What? She looked at him. We came here because of money. That doesn't mean yes, it does. Then Lauren looked at me. If there hadn't been land, I don't know when I would have found you. She swallowed. I hate admitting that. I nodded. But it's true. Yes. Then keep telling the truth. Nathan stared through the conference room glass. I could almost see him struggling against the person he had spent decades becoming. Finally, he asked, what would Dad think of us? My chest tightened. I don't know. You knew him better than anyone. Yes. So what would he say? I thought of Robert's patience, his careful planning, his belief that family was something you protected. He'd be disappointed. Nathan closed his eyes. But he would still love you. My son's face finally broke. One tear escaped. He wiped it away quickly. That was the moment I understood what I wanted to do. Not revenge, not rescue, something in between. Consequences with a door still open. After Nathan and Lauren left, Diane returned. How did it go? I looked at the box. They finally met their mother. Diane smiled sadly. No, they met Sierra Hart. I looked around the office. Maybe she was right. That afternoon, I called Charles Bennett. I've made a decision about the land. Are you ready to accept the offer? If the numbers make sense, yes. And the trust. I looked at the yellow blanket still resting on the conference table. I want to review every option available for my estate plan. Charles paused. Do you have something specific in mind? Yes. For 23 years, Nathan and Lauren had assumed that eventually, because they were my children, whatever I had would become theirs. I no longer believed inheritance should be an automatic reward for biology. But I didn't want to destroy them either. I wanted my money to reflect the life I had actually lived, and the people who had actually been there. The next conversation with my children would decide whether they understood the difference between punishment and consequence, because I was going to sell Robert's land. But the $4.8 million Nathan and Lauren had already spent in their imaginations was never going to become the rescue they expected. 3 weeks after Nathan and Lauren visited my office, I signed the documents authorizing the sale of the trust's interest in Robert's land. I did not do it for my children. I did not do it against them either. That distinction mattered. Charles Bennett had spent hours walking me through valuations, tax consequences, trust provisions, and the risks of holding the property longer. The developer's offer was strong. The surrounding parcels were moving toward consolidation, and there was no guarantee another offer would be better. Financially, selling made sense, so I sold. When the final transaction costs and obligations were calculated, the trust would receive a substantial amount, more money than Robert and I had ever imagined that forgotten land could produce. I sat in Charles's office after signing and stared at Robert's signature on one of the old trust documents. He would never believe this. Charles smiled. Robert understood patience. He called that land 3 pine trees and a headache. Apparently they were valuable pine trees. I laughed. Then the laughter faded. What happens now? Charles closed the sale file. Now we discuss what you asked me about, my estate plan. That conversation took longer. I wanted to protect my retirement, my home, my medical care, my independence. Charles insisted we begin there. Your children have already demonstrated a tendency to think about future assets as current assets, he said. That is a very polite way of saying they spent my money before I was dead. I am an attorney. Polite phrasing is expensive. I smiled. Then we discussed the rest. For years, Diane and I had worked with women whose lives had collapsed after widowhood, divorce, or family abandonment. Some had money, but no knowledge. Others had knowledge but no money. Many had spent decades caring for everyone else and reached 60 with no idea how to begin again. I knew that woman. I had been her. What if part of what remains eventually funds something for women like that, I asked. Charles leaned forward. What are you imagining? A fund, maybe grants, financial counseling, training, help with starting small businesses. That can be structured. I don't want it named after me. That can also be structured. I thought about it. Call it the second chapter fund. Charles smiled. I like that. So do I. Then came the harder question. Nathan and Lauren. I could have tried to remove them entirely from everything legally available for me to redirect. For several nights I considered it, not because I wanted revenge, because part of me believed leaving them anything would reward what they had done. Then I looked at the birthday cards. I thought about Nathan crying when he asked what Robert would think. I thought about Lauren holding Emily's blanket. They had done something cruel. For 23 years. But I did not want my final act as their mother to be another disappearance. So I chose something different. Boundaries. A meaningful portion of my estate would support the second chapter fund. Diane would receive recognition for her ownership and contributions to our business through separate arrangements we had already made. Nathan and Lauren would remain beneficiaries of a smaller future inheritance under my estate plan, subject to the legal structure Charles recommended. Enough to say, you were my children. Not enough to say, what you did had no consequences. When everything was prepared, I asked Nathan and Lauren to meet me at Charles's office. Nathan arrived tense. Lauren looked calmer. The moment we sat down, Nathan asked, "Did the sale close?" "Yes." His shoulders dropped. "Thank God." I watched him. "The trust received the proceeds." "Yes." He nodded rapidly. "Okay. Good. Then we can figure out distributions." Charles looked at him. "There will be no distribution to you from the land sale." Nathan stared at him. "What?" Lauren closed her eyes. Nathan turned toward me. "You said you were selling." "I did." "You knew about my capital call." "Yes." "Then what was the point?" "The point was that selling was financially appropriate for who the trust." Nathan laughed bitterly. "This is insane." "Nathan." "No, Lauren. She knows I'm going to lose my investment." I looked at him. "I know you may lose part or all of an investment you made. That is the same thing." "No." My voice remained calm. "You want me to treat your consequence as my emergency." He stared at me. "I need $180,000. I know. You have millions sitting in a trust. The trust has assets. Whatever. No, not whatever. That difference is exactly how you got here." His face reddened. "You're punishing me." "No. What would you call it, not rescuing you?" He stood. Charles spoke. "Mr. Collins, please sit down." Nathan ignored him. "For 23 years, you complained. We didn't treat you like family. And now when your family needs help, this is what you do." That hurt. He knew it would. The old Sierra might have opened her checkbook just to make the accusation stop. Instead, I looked at him. "You told people I was dead." Nathan froze. "You ignored me for more than 2 decades." He looked away. "You made a $400,000 investment without verifying the inheritance you planned to use." Silence. "I did not cause your problem." I leaned forward. "And I will not buy my way back into being your mother." Nathan slowly sat down. Lauren had tears in her eyes. Charles explained the estate changes in broad terms. He did not give them every private detail, nor did they have a right to demand it. But I wanted them to understand my decision. I told them about the second chapter fund. Lauren immediately nodded. "That makes sense." Nathan looked at her as if she'd betrayed him. "You're serious?" "Yes. That money was supposed to come to us." I looked at him. "No." He turned toward me. "Dad built that trust for family." "He did. We are family." "Yes." The answer surprised him. I continued. "And so were the women who sat with me when you didn't." Nathan's face hardened. Diane. My friends. The people who helped me rebuild my life. You're giving Dad's money to strangers. I'm using resources under my control to create something meaningful." Nathan pushed back from the table. "This is revenge." "No." "What else could it be?" I thought carefully before answering. "Revenge would be me wanting you to suffer." I looked directly at him. "I don't." His expression changed slightly. "I hope your investment survives. I hope you rebuild whatever you lose. I hope you become wiser because of this." I paused. "But consequence means I am no longer required to sacrifice my security or my values to prevent you from feeling the results of your own decisions." The room became silent. "That is not revenge," Lauren whispered. "She's right." Nathan turned toward her. "You borrowed against your house too." "I know. And you're fine with this." "No." Lauren's voice shook. "I'm terrified." She looked at me. "But Mom didn't make me borrow the money." For the first time since returning, Lauren had stopped asking me to absorb responsibility for her choices. I saw it immediately. So did Nathan. He looked between us. Then he stood. "I can't do this." He walked out. Nobody followed him. That mattered too. For years, whenever Nathan became angry, someone chased him. That day we let him leave. Lauren remained seated. After a minute, she asked, "What happens to my inheritance?" I answered honestly. "You will still receive something if there is something to receive when I die." She nodded. "Less than before, yes. How much less? I don't think that number would help us right now." She surprised me. "Okay." Then she looked down at her hands. I don't want it. I studied her. You're frightened about your loan. I am. So don't say things you may regret. She shook her head. I don't mean I never want an inheritance. At least she was honest. I mean, that's not what I want from you right now. She looked at me. Her eyes filled. I want to know if there's anything left of my mother. For a moment I couldn't speak. There she was. Not the 41-year-old marketing executive, not the woman who had hidden me from Emily. My daughter. The little girl who once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. I wanted to cross the room and hold her. Instead, I gave her the truth. There is. Lauren began crying. But you don't get her back in one afternoon. She nodded. I know. You don't get to apologize once and make 23 years disappear. I know. You don't get to call only when you're afraid. I know. And I cannot promise that we'll ever have the relationship we might have had. Her voice broke. I know. I reached across the table. This time I let my hand touch hers. Lauren gripped it. I am sorry, Mom. No explanation followed. No but. No request for money. Just the apology. I squeezed her hand once. I believe you are. She looked up hopefully. That isn't the same as forgiveness. Her expression fell slightly. I understand. But it is somewhere to begin. We sat like that for several minutes. Two women connected by blood, separated by choices, trying to determine whether love could survive without pretending the damage had never happened. When Lauren left, Nathan was no longer in the parking lot. That evening, I returned home and opened the box of birthday cards. I took out the newest card addressed to Lauren. Then I found Nathan's. For years, those cards had been the only safe place I could put my love. Now perhaps I would not need the box forever. But I wasn't ready to empty it. Not yet. I walked onto the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. I thought about the money, the land, the trust. For 23 years, my children had acted as though my death was more convenient than my life. Now my life, not my eventual death, was determining what happened to everything Robert had protected. That was the justice I had never known I needed. Not watching Nathan fail, not watching Lauren cry. Simply being allowed to make decisions about my own future without apologizing. 6 months later, Lauren would be calling me every Sunday. I would finally meet Emily. And Nathan would appear at my door carrying one of the birthday cards I had written but never sent. He wouldn't ask for money. He wouldn't mention the trust. He would say something I had waited 23 years to hear. Not an excuse, not a demand. The beginning of accountability. And that was when I would have to decide whether opening the door meant surrendering my boundaries, or whether perhaps it was possible to do both. To protect myself, and still leave